House of Commons sound. 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 House of Commons sound House of Commons sound. 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 House of Commons sound.
Order, order. Question is Secretary of Sport, Digital Culture Media. I call the Secretary of State to answer the substantive question for Dr. Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With your permission, Mr. Speaker, I will answer this with question 2. The tourism sector has been severely impacted by this crisis, and we are working closely with the sector to get it back on its feet, including developing COVID-secure reopening guidance for the tourism businesses. Visit Britain have introduced an industry standard quality mark called You're Good to Go that businesses can use if they meet COVID-secure guidelines. This has had over 20,000 applications already, and the new £10 million Kickstart tourism package gives small businesses in tourist destinations grants of up to £5,000 to help them adapt their businesses.
Head up to North Cumbria and call in on Dr. Neil Hudson. Dr. Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last weekend, I joined several businesses as they reopened in my constituency and saw the great work they had done to reopen safely. Will my honourable friend join with me in thanking the tourism and hospitality businesses in Penrith and the border and across the country for their efforts in preparing to safely reopen? And further to the really welcome announcements from the Chancellor yesterday, will he agree that these sectors that may be slower to recover should be kept under review and additional government support provided if necessary to help them through to the next full season?
Mr.
I fully agree with my honourable friend. Tourism and hospitality businesses right across the country have invested an incredible amount of time and energy getting ready to reopen. Tourism is vital to our economy, and I too was delighted to see the sector take its first steps towards reopening last weekend and the announcements yesterday with the cut in VAT. Earlier this week, I participated in a round table organised by Cumbria Tourism, who I know the honourable member has been working very closely with. I'll continue to monitor the situation and engage very closely with business.
Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend will know from his visit to the Cotswolds last Saturday how important tourism is. In particular, the arts are very important, and the Barn Theatre in Cirencester is a relatively new theatre, highly innovative. Through the COVID period, has done an awful lot to keep people informed through social media about the government guidelines. Would he ensure, in the guidance of this new 1.5 billion money for theatres and the arts, that that theatre and other small theatres like it get their fair share of the money?
Well, I'd also like to thank the Barn Theatre for all they have done to help the local community during the coronavirus crisis, and indeed tourism, leisure and arts businesses right across the country, and it was a pleasure to visit some of them in his constituency last weekend. I can confirm that the purpose of the £1.57 billion Cultural Support Fund is to support organisations across the cultural sector, right across the country, including those who do not have a history of receiving public fundings. More information on the eligibility criteria and application process will be coming by the end of this month, and I encourage the Barn Theatre to apply.
Shadow Minister Alex Sobel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After staffing, the largest cost many tourism and hospitality businesses face are their rents. One of the main asks from the sector for yesterday's statement was help with rent. There is a moratorium on evictions till September. However, many pubs, restaurants, amusement arcades, small museums and other tourist destinations are facing their quarterly rent bills when they have had no income. What additional steps is the government taking to help them and ensure we don't see mass closures?
Thank you. I thank the Honourable Gentleman for those comments. I know he shares my concerns about the sector, which is why we've taken so many measures. The issue with rent has indeed been raised at the working group. He's right that a moratorium has actually existed. We continue to look at further measures. Of course, the range of measures already announced are being taken advantage of by the sector, whether it's loans, grants, business rates relief, furlough, and of course the VAT reduction yesterday was welcomed across the sector, but we will continue to engage with them and see what further assistance may be required.
We now come to a substantive question from Ian Lavery to Minister Wong.
Mr. Speaker, the work of the voluntary sector in North London and across
Ian, sorry. Just let the Minister come back and then we'll come back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Government announced an unprecedented £750 million funding package supporting frontline charities to continue their vital work during the COVID-19 outbreak, and we have unlocked a further £150 million from dormant bank accounts and building society accounts. In addition, there is, of course, the coronavirus job retention scheme and a host of other measures announced by the Chancellor yesterday.
Up to one's bet to Ian Lavery. Ian Lavery.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The work of the voluntary sector in North London and across the country has been absolutely priceless during the COVID-19 pandemic. The work has been literally life-saving for many of the most vulnerable people in our communities. However, the North London CVE reports that a half of the organisations are representative have got less than 6 months reserves, and a third expect to lose 50% of their income because of fundraising restrictions. Will the Minister give his cast iron assurance to these essential organisations that adequate future government funding will be targeted in local areas rather than being funneled to the larger national organisations? And secondly, that government assistance and support in post-pandemic era will focus heavily on the operational challenges that will be required to function in the nation's new norm.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too pay tribute to the extraordinary work of charities in Wansbeck and, of course, beyond. And, Mr. Speaker, he is right to say that we need to focus on the vital work done by so many small charities. That is precisely why the £750 million of funding is being administered in the way that it is, and we are working as hard as we possibly can to get it to those charities as quickly as possible.
Dean Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that when the Secretary of State kindly spoke to Tom Cruise and producers of Mission Impossible on my behalf recently, he showed a real need for speed, and by putting together a cocktail of measures for the entertainment industry, and it was our critics that cannot handle the truth that his actions were helping more than a few good men and women return to work across civil society, the entertainment industry in Leavesden in Watford. And may I assure the Speaker that this message will not self-destruct. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, he rightly pays tribute to an extraordinary industry. The only thing I would say in addition is that he clearly deserves a cameo role in that next Mission Impossible film.
Shadow Minister Chris Matheson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Follow that. One of the best ways to support the voluntary sector is to listen to them when they call for a policy change, such as Age UK, whose petition to keep the over-75s TV licence free has now attracted over 634,000 signatures, while 93% of the nearly 90,000 pensioners who responded to a survey by the charity said that television had become more important since the pandemic erupted. The BBC is cutting jobs and content to pay for the cost of the licence dumped on them by the government, and pensioners are forced to choose between eating and watching TV. So will the government now listen to Age UK and reverse this unfair policy?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The fact is that the BBC has had a generous licence fee settlement, and it is deeply disappointing that they have chosen to go down the path that they apparently are going down. I would, of course, hope that there is yet time to reconsider that, because he is right to say that television has been a vital comfort for many people in the last few months, and it is a vital part of our national economy as well.
We have a substantive question from Kenny McCaskill, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I will group this question with number 8. This government is investing £5 billion to deliver nationwide gigabit-capable broadband as soon as possible to ensure that the hardest parts of the country to reach are not left behind. And we're also removing barriers to rollout, for example, by introducing legislation to make it easier for operators to connect to blocks of flats. And £1.8 billion has already been spent making sure that 96% of the country can now access superfast broadband.
Let's head up to Scotland with Kenny McCaskill. Kenny McCaskill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Those words from the Minister are all very well, but the A1 and East Coast Main Line run through my constituency, as does the National Grid with Torness and Cockenzie. Yet the essential medium as shown during this coronavirus crisis is connectivity and broadband. Much of that remains poor and entirely inadequate. Given the government's target is only 91% for geographic mobile coverage in Scotland, yet 98% in England, when can my constituents expect the broadband and mobile coverage required for this coronavirus crisis, let alone the 21st century?
Minister. Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I've said, we have an ambition to deliver gigabit-capable broadband as fast as possible, and we are working with the Scottish Government to deliver that. I look forward to my forthcoming meeting, another meeting with my Scottish counterpart, Paul Wheelhouse, next week, because it is vital that we work together on this. The geography of Scotland is, of course, uniquely challenging, but we should not let that serve as a barrier to our ambitions.
Remaining in Scotland, I'm going to go to Marion Fellows. Marion Fellows.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What's clear is that post-COVID society is going to rely even more on reliable broadband internet than it has until now. The Secretary of State's predecessor struggled with the reserved nature of broadband and telecommunications. So, will the Minister and the Secretary of State now accept this is an area reserved to Westminster? And will he commit now to matching the level of funding for Scotland that Northern Ireland has enjoyed recently?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we have put in an additional £21 million into Scottish broadband on top of the £101 million already invested by the UK government in Scotland. She is right that we need to go as far and as fast as we possibly can. That's why we're working with the Scottish government to make sure that increasing coverage is possible and that Scotland does not miss out on anything that it needs in this 21st century connected environment. It is vital that we do that. The challenging geography is not, as I say, going to be a barrier to our ambitions.
Staying in Scotland, we now head to the SNP spokesperson, John Littleson. John Littleson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm concerned that the government has gone completely silent on its 2025 rollout target for gigabit-capable broadband. Instead, we're told it will be delivered as soon as possible. Now, it's been 5 months since the Secretary of State last pledged the government's commitment to this key Conservative manifesto promise in this House. No statement has been made, and industry voices are, of course, growing anxious that without immediate action to address the policy barriers, there's simply no chance whatsoever of achieving it. Meanwhile, thousands of businesses across rural Scotland continue to struggle with archaic internet speeds. So, for the avoidance of doubt, and for the record, 2025, yes or no?
Mr. Speaker, the government has been clear that we will go as fast as we possibly can. We are removing the barriers that he discussed, but of course it is also right to say that this is an immensely challenging target. Going as fast as possible is the right thing to do, and we will be working as hard as we possibly can to go as far as we possibly can by 2025, and my ambition is absolutely to reach the number that he describes in our manifesto.
Minister, we have a substantive question from Kate Griffiths.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The programme to deliver rural gigabit connectivity is making excellent progress, with nearly 500 rural primary schools, 200 more than planned, having an arrangement to fund a gigabit broadband upgrade, and we continue to connect other rural hub sites too, including health sites, as well as issue vouchers to rural SMEs and to residents. We will work with devolved administrations, local authorities and other government departments to ensure that as many public sector sites as possible can be included within this programme.
Let's head to Burton and visit Kate Griffiths. Kate Griffiths.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Staffordshire Superfast programme team have done a considerable amount of work to bring Superfast broadband services to my constituents of Burton and Uttoxeter, reaching over 96% of East Staffordshire this year. However, I'm very concerned for those who live rurally, who are struggling to access even 1 megabit per second connections. The community of Lee, for example, have been quoted around £50,000 per household for a connection. Will the Minister meet with me to discuss how we might get affordable connections to our rural communities?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Of course, I'd be delighted to meet with the Honourable Lady. I pay tribute to the work that she is doing to champion this vital utility in the 21st century. Some of the geography of Lee is challenging. We do have a number of properties that are a long way from exchanges, but that is no excuse. It is why we are exploring all avenues, and I look forward to discussing them with her.
We now come to Stephen Crabb.
Number 11, sir.
Number 11.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with your permission, I will group this with answers to questions 10 and 14. Arts and culture define our nation and form a vital part of the ecosystem that makes us a creative industry superpower. And at a time when the nation is crying out for comfort, they enrich our soul. That's why I was delighted this week to announce an unprecedented £1.57 billion package to help theatres, museums, live music venues and galleries weather this ongoing storm. I want to see these institutions open their doors as soon as it is safe to do so, and I'm working extensively with the sector on how to achieve this, and will be publishing a further roadmap timings for further steps imminently.
Stephen Crabb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When it comes to live music and festivals, Britain probably leads the way. And as the Secretary of State says, that success is built on an incredible ecosystem of British performers, technicians, sound engineers, and many other freelancers. So could my right honourable friend say a bit more about how he intends that major package of funding that he announced on Monday to be used to support this important sector, which has taken a real battering over the last 3 months?
Well, my right honourable friend is absolutely correct to highlight the value of live music venues, and I've engaged extensively with the sector, including hosting roundtables with them, and I was determined that this package should include support for them. So this package will cover areas such as grassroots music venues, concert halls and indoor arenas. And live music venues are basically, we're defining those as wholly or mainly used for the performance of live music for the purposes of entertaining an audience.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Cornwall, we've warmly welcomed the recent announcements from the Prime Minister, the Chancellor of the Exchequer and from the Secretary of State, particularly in support of the arts and the culture and heritage. In Truro and Falmouth, we are blessed to have a fantastic theatre on the brink of completion, which will serve the whole of Cornwall, namely the Hall for Cornwall, and act as a beacon for the arts in our whole county. What support can my right honourable friend provide for organisations such as these that are an integral part to our community?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for her question. Look, I've been very clear right from the start in designing this package that it's intended to achieve two principal outcomes. First of all, to protect those crown jewels, nationally and internationally significant institutions, but also and equally vitally to help cultural institutions up and down the country where their loss would deprive communities of essential cultural experiences. We will be publishing the full criteria and processes shortly, and of course that will include, for example, demonstrating that they have exhausted all available funds. But I know that my honourable friend will be tirelessly making the case for Cornwall, and indeed I hope the Minyak Theatre will soon be able to open as well.
Swattling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Firstly, I'd like to thank my right honourable friend for all the hard work, including putting up with me bothering him relentlessly to achieve the remarkable result of the 1.57 billion for the arts and culture sector. But will he now agree to meet with me and the all-party political group for theatre to discuss some policy changes, including possible reduction in business rates to help this theatre sector truly flourish as it begins to reopen?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question. He's too modest to admit it on the floor of the House, but I would like to thank him for his vital work in helping to shape this important package and support this vital sector. I would, of course, be delighted to meet with the APPG. In fact, the only thing that would give me more pleasure would be to go on a visit to a theatre which was performing with the APPG, which I hope will happen soon.
Zara Sultana.
Number 14, please.
Minister Dining.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With your permission, I'd like to start by sending the very best wishes of the House to our honourable friend and former DCMS Minister, the Member of Parliament for Chatham and Aylesford, who starts her treatment for cancer, breast cancer today. With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'd also like to answer this question along with questions 15, 16 and 17. Some of our creative sector, like the film, TV and music industry, are already back up and running. We recognise the challenges the creative industries face because of COVID-19, and that's why, in addition to the unprecedented package of support for businesses, jobs and workforce, the government has announced an extra £1.57 billion cultural rescue package.
Sarah Sultan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituency is home to excellent theatres, live music venues and museums and galleries. And I'd like to put on record that I was pleased to join the trustee board of the Albany Theatre earlier this week. It's in part thanks to this vibrant cultural sector that Coventry was awarded City of Culture 2021. The measures announced earlier this week are vital to ensuring that these organisations survive through the crisis. So will the Minister meet with me to ensure that the support package finds its way to Coventry and keeps those organisations afloat? Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, the Honourable Lady makes an excellent point, and I'm very excited to spend more time in Coventry when it celebrates being the City of Culture in 2021. And she's right to draw attention to some of the incredible theatres and other cultural assets that her city has. I'd be very keen to meet with her to discuss it further.
We're heading to Manchester to visit Lucy Powell. Lucy Powell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As you know, Mr. Speaker, Manchester really is one of the creative industry hubs of the UK. And it's not just made up of its institutions, but of a wealth of talented, highly skilled individuals and small micro organisations. So can the Minister tell them and me how the self-employed and those who are the directors of limited companies, how they are going to support themselves to stay in this industry in the coming months when all their work has dried up and they've got no extra support?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, of course, we know that the creative industries are not the venues, they aren't the organisations or the studios they inhabit. They are the people, the skilled artists, the craftsmen, the designers, the performers, the technicians that make us world-class in this sector. And we know that this includes very many freelancers and self-employed. 2.7 million people have benefited from the Self-Employed Income Support Scheme, and 95% of people who receive the majority of their income from self-employment have been eligible, and the next round of that scheme will open in August.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Mr. Speaker, one of my constituents, Jim Sutherland, is a composer and music producer who's worked on the music of films such as Brave and Outlaw King. Now, he's a freelancer under PAYE, and so many like him are the backbone of our creative industries, demonstrating exactly the type of entrepreneurial spirit that this government says it wants to encourage as we recover. But yet again, in a week which has seen 200 MPs join the excluded UK APPG, the government has failed to support our self-employed. What reassurances can the Minister give to Jim and other freelancers in the industry that there will be support for them?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the Honourable Lady is obviously very proud, and rightly so, of her constituent and all her creative constituents in her area. We, of course, recognise the really crucial role that individuals play in making our creative industries world leading. The £1.57 billion cultural package, which includes £97 million for Scotland, which announced this week, will allow more businesses to survive and more creative activity to restart, ensuring employment opportunities for freelancers. And at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, that is what our freelancers want to do. They want to get back to work.
Tamanjeet Singh Desa.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In particular, given that we have Pinewood Studios on our doorstep, Slough is a major cultural hub. But many of my constituents working within the creative industries have contacted me to express their grave concerns. I'm sure the Minister will agree with me that the work they do is invaluable to our culture and economy. But due to the limits of social distancing, many planned film and television shoots have not taken place, and local theatres are in a serious predicament. So what measures will the government put in place to ensure that in the coming months these industries will not suffer further as a result of COVID-19 and will continue to be supported?
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and the Honourable Gentleman speaks with great passion for his local area, and I know he's a great supporter of the cultural industries and arts in his area. We've already made available £160 million through Arts Council England to support individuals and organisations. £20 million of that has gone to individuals, and £50 million to the non-portfolio organisations that they would normally support. But this unprecedented package, it's a world-beating package, £1.57 billion, is world-leading and will really make a huge difference to struggling industries up and down the country.
Julian Knight, Chair of the Select Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The BBC calls them old classics. The rest of us call them repeats. And we're going to see a lot more of them due to our world-leading TV and film production companies being shut down. Can the Minister outline for the House what the government is doing to ensure this highly profitable, high-growth creative sector is brought back fully, and in particular, how they're tackling the issue of reinsurance? After all, there are only so many episodes of Dad's Army and Bread one can possibly watch.
But you could say the same about the Honourable Gentleman's, my Honourable friend's jokes, Mr. Speaker. He's absolutely right to champion this. We know that our TV and film production companies are lead the world. That's why I've been meeting on a weekly basis with the sector to set up the guidance that we needed to try and get them back up and running, and I'm so pleased that so many of them are now able to start work. But the insurance issue is something that we are very concerned about, and there are ongoing talks to see if there are any way that we can help resolve that.
Nick Fletcher.
Number 20, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government is committed to investing in young people's futures and ensuring that their voices are heard. The £500 million Youth Investment Fund launching this year will fund new, refurbished and mobile youth centres alongside investment in positive activities and youth workers across the country. DCMS launched a new online tool earlier this month to involve young people in policy making and has supported the National Youth Agency to produce guidance for youth organisations on operating safely during COVID-19.
Nick Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that in order to succeed in life, young people also need good role models, and consequently, will he therefore offer his support to my Role Models project?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. He is absolutely right that good role models are absolutely crucial, now perhaps more than ever. I'm delighted to offer my support and that of the department to his new project, and I look forward to discussing it more with him.
I'm sorry about that. We now have to go to topicals, and we've got a question to Oliver Dowden, number 1. Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this week we announced the £1.57 billion package to help arts, heritage and cultural institutions weather the storm of COVID. This is, as I said, the largest ever one-off investment in UK culture and a testament to this government's commitment to the arts. Alongside that, we've also been working flat out to get our sectors back up and running. So elite sports events are back on, with a third of Premier League games free to air. Recreational cricket is back this weekend. Cameras are rolling on British-made blockbusters. Hotels, B&Bs and campsites are back welcoming guests. We've got more to do, and there will be further announcements on restarts imminently, but the best way to secure jobs and revive our sectors is to reopen them safely, and I won't stop until we've achieved this for all DCMS sectors.
Said to Yorkshire with Jason McCartney. Jason McCartney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Physical exercise is important not just for physical well-being, but for mental health. With that in mind, when will the Secretary of State update the guidance so that we can soon see the safe reopening of gyms and fitness centres?
Well, I pay tribute to my honourable friend. I know he's campaigned tirelessly on this point and has raised it frequently with me. I also pay tribute to the gyms themselves who have engaged very constructively with us to overcome some of the hurdles. I hope to be able to make an announcement imminently in relation to that, and as I've said previously, the aim has always been to get gyms back by mid-July.
Let's head to Cardiff to the Shadow Secretary of State, Joe Stevens.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Chancellor rightly focused on jobs in his statement yesterday, but according to the Creative Industries Federation, freelancers make up 47% of the workforce. And as the House has heard this morning from a number of honourable members, millions of freelancers have been excluded from the government schemes and left without support for 4 long months, and they face the prospect of many more months without income. Will any of the money that the Secretary of State announced on Monday go to freelancers? And if so, exactly when will they receive it?
Well, the Honourable Lady is absolutely right to highlight the importance of freelancers. That's why, alongside the jobs retention scheme and the furlough scheme, as part of that, there were also announcements for the self-employed, and tens of thousands of self-employed have been able to access it. In respect of the scheme I announced earlier this week, I would have hoped that the Honourable Lady, having campaigned on this so tirelessly, would have started by welcoming this package and indeed joined the dozens of organisations who have welcomed it. I'm very happy to share a dossier of that. The key thing for freelancers is to protect the institutions so that in future they can return as they reopen, and that is what this package achieves.
Returning to Joe Stevens with the second question. Joe Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll take that as a no then. The government's failure to create a fully functioning test, track and isolate system has damaged public confidence, and the last thing the country needs now is another public health crisis. Earlier this week, the Centre for Countering Digital Hate published a report exposing how big tech companies like Facebook and Google have profited from an anti-vaccination industry that has grown to 58 million followers during the COVID crisis. Polling by YouGov showed that 31% of Britons polled don't plan to have a COVID vaccine when one becomes available, and that social media use and vaccine refusal are linked. When is he going to put the public health and safety before the interests of the big tech companies profiting on the back of a global pandemic and publish the online harms bill?
Secretary of State.
Well, I have great respect for the Honourable Lady, but I think that's a gross mischaracterisation of the priorities of this government, given that we were the first government to actually commit to bringing forward online harms legislation. I've set out the timetable for doing that, but she is absolutely right to highlight the concerns around anti-vax. Not only have we stood up the counter-disinformation unit, but I'm also working with my ministerial colleagues, both in the department and cross-government, to coordinate our work in relation to anti-vax in preparation for a situation, I hope, where we have a vaccine available.
Anthony Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. South Cambridgeshire is the biomedical capital of Europe, with literally dozens of organisations working to develop treatments, cures and vaccines for coronavirus. It's also one of the most economically productive areas of Britain. But it is also very rural, and with many people working at home, they're getting very frustrated with the poor mobile phone coverage. I met recently with my Right Honourable friend, the Digital Minister, to talk about this, but will my Right Honourable friend, the Secretary of State, commit to working with me and the mobile phone industry to improve mobile phone coverage in South Cambridgeshire so we can help develop these cures and vaccines for coronavirus?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right to highlight this issue, and I'm determined to make sure that no part of this country is left behind when it comes to mobile connectivity. As he may know, we've already struck a deal with mobile operators to create a shared rural network that will make patchy mobile coverage a thing of the past, and operators are currently developing rollout plans. And I would encourage his constituents to engage as they do so to ensure that they get the digital connectivity that they deserve.
Let's head to North Tyneside and visit Murray Glendon. Murray Glendon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now that Northumberland is to benefit from government funding to boost the county's digital connectivity, has the Minister got a plan or timescale in place for the rollout out of FTTP to facilitate job creation here in North Tyneside and across the rest of the Northern Powerhouse?
Yes, well, that is exactly why in our manifesto we made that ambitious target of rollout of full fibre to the premises by 2025. We're actually making a very rapid progress in relation to it. The numbers have roughly doubled in the past year, and my honourable friend, the Minister for Digital Infrastructure, and I are working tirelessly to drive us towards that target.
Mr. Speaker, beautiful Hastings and Rye has an amazing cultural and art sector which has unfortunately largely missed out on the remarkable economic packages provided by this government. Bearing in mind the success of FD Roosevelt's new arts projects works, what measures is my right honourable friend considering to put rocket boosters under our performing arts sector and live music venues to enhance their contribution in turbocharging our economy?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right to highlight the central role of the arts to our creative industries. They help make us a powerhouse. That's why we're working to ensure the reopening of them as rapidly as possible, and there'll be announcements on that shortly. It's also why I welcome the tremendous announcement by the Chancellor yesterday. Those VAT cuts will apply to almost all of the sectors that she highlights.
Rob Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Throughout the current coronavirus crisis, communities around the country have relied on their local radio stations, both BBC and commercial. In Aylesbury, Mix 96 has been a vital and valuable source of information building on its 40-year commitment to the town. So does my right honourable friend agree that when big media groups like Bauer buy up small stations like Mix, it is imperative to balance commercial imperatives alongside a genuine commitment to serve communities with locally produced content, local news and jobs for local people?
I wholly agree with my honourable friend. At a time of rising misinformation and disinformation, having reliable local news is a very important way of tackling that.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The support packages are welcome and better late than never, but he's still not answering questions about how self-employed creatives are going to be supported through the long term of this crisis. And the creative sector is literally the life and soul of my constituency in Glasgow North. So if this government can't guarantee the support that creatives need, will he devolve the powers to the Scottish Parliament so Scotland's Parliament can support our artists in all their different shapes and forms?
Well, I would gently say to the honourable gentleman that this package gives £96 million to Scotland under Barnett consequentials, and I trust he'll be ensuring that those go to those industries rather than other priorities of the Scottish Government.
Heading to Lancashire with Mark Menzies. Mark Menzies.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the domestic hospitality and tourism sectors rearing to rebound following the recent disruption, what is the Department doing to encourage the British public to support these efforts and visit our coastal tourist attractions and resorts, in particular the gem of the Fylde Coast?
Well, I share my honourable friend's love of the Fylde Coast, and when we used to have party conferences in Blackpool, I used to enjoy taking a dip in the sea in October. It's precisely for that reason that we have announced a massive VAT cut for the tourism sector to help restart it.
Right, thank you, Secretary of State. We're now going to head over to the Attorney General, and we're going to start with the Attorney General question, and I'm going... Oh, Sir Michael, Attorney General, good to see you. Right, we now go to Jeff Smith.
Question number 1, sir.
Morning, Mr. Speaker. I share the concern over the growing backlog in the courts. COVID has presented an unprecedented challenge for our justice system, and the UK is a global leader when it comes to the Crown Courts. Jury trials restarted in May. Digital tools have been harnessed in over 10,000 cases, and all courts will reopen by mid-July. I'm proud that prosecutors have continued to fulfil their responsibilities in spite of the pandemic, both remotely and physically, and the CPS has been actively involved in cross-government discussions to continue progressing work through the courts.
Jeff Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I join her in commending the work of CPS staff, many others, including jurors, to keep our justice system running during the pandemic. So, can the Attorney-General assure the House that measures taken to help reduce the backlog will not include judge-only-led trials?
Well, there are a range of criminal justice issues that the Lord Chancellor and I discuss on a regular basis. And as you all know, the Ministry of Justice is leading the Court's Recovery Plan. They published it last week. That plan includes a suite of measures, legislative and non-legislative measures. The point is, nothing is decided, but I can reassure the honourable gentleman that I am deeply committed to the right to jury trial.
We now come to Sir Robert Neal, Chair of the Select Committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I think all members of my Select Committee and I would welcome that last comment about the importance of jury trials too. But in relation to the Court Recovery Plan, the Lord Chancellor told the Justice Committee that he will make all resource that was necessary available to seek to clear the backlog, including the Nightingale courts that we've heard about, sitting courts to maximum capacity. Will she ensure that the CPS has the resources, both in terms of money, but also personnel, both in-house lawyers, solicitor advocates, and instructing extra independent members of the bar when necessary to make sure that there is always a prosecutor and a competent and qualified prosecutor available to prosecute cases wherever they're needed to make sure that this backlog is dealt with?
Well, the Right Honourable Gentleman raises an important point, and the CPS is not immune to the impact of the backlog. I'm very pleased that throughout this pandemic they have coped remarkably well despite the challenges, and the recent inspectorate report published at the end of last month really does set out in a lot of detail how well the CPS has responded to the difficulties. They are currently receiving 1.8 cases for every one that can be completed in the court. And I should note that they've also successfully maintained their recruitment plans despite the pandemic. And we now have over 300 new prosecutors within the CPS.
We're now heading to Lewisham to see the Shadow Attorney General Ellie Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The recent HM Crown Prosecution Inspectorate report found it could take 10 years to clear the criminal case backlog, with 41,000 outstanding cases and a criminal justice system on its knees. Whilst Labour have been calling for Nightingale and COVID-safe courts for the last 4 months, the government have been discussing scrapping jury trials. So can the Attorney-General confirm today when the Nightingale courts will be up and running? And can she also tell us how many victims of sexual violence are still waiting for their case to get to court?
Well, I'm very glad that the Honourable Lady has mentioned the recent inspectorate report, which I think gives a very strong commendation to the CPS for their response to this pandemic. In comparative terms, actually, this is a very strong vote of confidence in the CPS's resilience, its digital capability, and its planning for difficulties such as these. She's right to mention the Court Recovery Plan, and as I've mentioned before, the Lord Chancellor has published a detailed plan. Many measures are under consideration. There is a strong commitment to the right to jury trial, but no decisions have been made yet.
John Lamont.
Question 4, please, Mr. Speaker. With your permission, Mr. Speaker, I'll answer this question with number 5. Reporting by the press or on social media may sometimes present a risk of prejudice to criminal proceedings. It is important to protect due process and the right to a fair trial. In my role as guardian of the public interest, I can and I have issued media advisory notices. This is important in order to inform responsible reporting to avoid prejudice to ongoing criminal proceedings.
John Long.
For that response, but does the Solicitor General agree with me that on the whole the press do act responsibly and are swift to act in relation to material which may be prejudicial to court proceedings? Well, I thank him for his question, my honourable friend, and he's right. And it's right to acknowledge that the press are, on the whole, very responsible in their reporting of court proceedings, which is why issuing a media advisory notice is an exceptional course of action, Mr. Speaker. In the past 12 months, I've only done that twice. However, it remains an important power which will be used if necessary.
We now head up to Michael Fabricant in Lichfield. Michael Fabricant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Journalists, of course, do get training, but the average person doesn't know about contempt of court, and we get contempt of court through social media. So what can his department do to try and educate people when they might be doing just that inadvertently?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend from Lichfield for that question? It's quite right, and he makes an important point about social media and the risk of contempt of court. My office has prepared and promoted materials available online to inform the general public, including slides and web pages, and I entirely agree with my honourable friend that this is an emphasis on education is important to ensure that members of the public do not inadvertently publish prejudicial material online, because doing so can have serious consequences.
We now have a substantive question to the Attorney-General from Henry Smith. Attorney-General.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I will join this with number 7. First of all, I want to thank the CPS for their hard work during this difficult time. They've had to adapt to significant changes to their normal working practices, and despite the challenges, have maintained a high quality of service within our criminal justice system and for victims. The Inspectorate report published on the 30th of June sets out an analysis of its response to the pandemic. It commends the organisation's digital capability, its strategic planning and its foresight in upgrading its capabilities, which meant that prosecutors were able to continue their vital work with minimum disruption. And I was very pleased to virtually visit the CPS in the Southwest, where I was able to see firsthand the impressive way in which they transitioned to this new way of working.
And it's Henry Smith in Crawley. Henry Smith.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. What progress has the Crown Prosecution Service made in its recruitment campaigns during the COVID-19 pandemic?
Last week I chaired the CPS Ministerial Board, at which I was pleased to hear that the CPS's recruitment programme has continued at pace throughout the pandemic, utilising digital tools, including video interviews. The CPS is recruiting 390 new staff as a result of the government's £85 million investment in the CPS. 225 lawyers have started, and a further 76 have been offered roles and will be starting in the near future. The most recent campaign closed on the 17th of June and resulted in a record number of applications, 901.
Sarah Brittle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Attorney-General tell the House how many members of the CPS were off sick due to COVID-19?
I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. The CPS has been monitoring the absence level of both lawyer and support staff throughout the pandemic. Where necessary, the CPS have redeployed staff between different CPS areas to ensure workloads were effectively managed. Court closures and the significant reduction in court sittings resulted in the release of some staff to undertake different tasks and work. This increased the amount of legal and administrative resources available for casework.
8 is withdrawn, so we're going to Ellen Reeves again. Returning to Ellen Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. West Midlands Police recorded over 4,000 cases of domestic violence in the first month of lockdown. Yet only 3% of these cases have resulted in criminal charges. And between 2015 and 2019, despite domestic violence cases rising by 77%, charging fell by 18% and convictions by 20%. So I ask the Attorney-General again, how many victims of sexual violence are still waiting for their case to get to court? And what is she doing to ensure that domestic abuse does not go unpunished?
Attorney-General.
It's essential that perpetrators, victims and their families know and understand that the criminal justice system remains open and operational during the COVID outbreak. And both myself and the CPS are working closely with colleagues across government and the criminal justice system to ensure that these horrendous offences continue to be brought to justice. Priority must be given to the most serious cases to make sure that dangerous offenders are dealt with quickly. That's why the CPS has worked with police colleagues to introduce an interim charging protocol with clear guidance on its use. All non-custody domestic abuse cases were categorised as high priority and will be dealt with accordingly.
Clive Efford.
Number 10.
Firstly, I want to say to the honourable gentleman that this is a tragic case and my thoughts remain with Belly Majinga's family and friends. On the 5th of June, the British Transport Police asked the Crown Prosecution Service to give their independent opinion on the available evidence and prospect of it meeting the general principles of prosecution outlined in the Code for Crown Prosecutors. The Crown Prosecution Service has requested that the British Transport Police pursue further lines of inquiry, and once that's been completed, the CPS will be able to finalise the review.
I'm grateful for that response. That's very helpful, and I'm sure the whole House shares the comments that the Attorney General has made. This was a very high-profile case, and everyone was quite rightly shocked when they heard the description of the alleged assault on Belly Majinga. There was evidence from a colleague that was there at the time, so I was surprised that there wasn't sufficient evidence for a charge of assault if it wasn't possible to prove that it was the source of the COVID-19 that eventually took her life. So I'm grateful to the Attorney General for that answer. Will she just give us an assurance that she will continue to pursue the CPS and the British Transport Police to bring this very important issue to a conclusion, whether it's charges or whether there's insufficient evidence, but the people who are concerned about this really need to know the outcome.
I share the honourable gentleman's commitment to justice for Belly Majinga and her family here. The matter is still being considered, and the Crown Prosecution Service has requested that the British Transport Police obtain further information on further lines of inquiry. As the review is still ongoing, I'm unable to provide further information at this stage, but I'm sure there will be an announcement in due course.
We now come to a substantive question to the Solicitor General from Jessica.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government takes cases of domestic abuse extremely seriously. Despite the challenges generated by the COVID-19 pandemic, the CPS has shown its determination to bring perpetrators to justice and provide victims with the greatest possible protection from repeat offending. And I have to say these cases are amongst the highest priority for the Crown Prosecution Service and the highest priority being dealt with by the criminal justice system. And can I take this opportunity to commend, by the way, Mr. Speaker, with your permission, the superb work of the Duchess of Cornwall on the issue of domestic abuse and her leadership in this area.
We head down to Jessica Morden in Wales. Jessica Morden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's been an 83% increase in domestic abuse-related crimes in Wales since 2015, but the 85 million promised by government to the CPS goes nowhere near addressing the 225 million cuts by the government. So can I ask ministers again, what assurances can the Attorney General and ministers give victims that resourcing is sufficient for their cases to be dealt with effectively?
I thank her for this important question. The government has recently announced a number of funding packages linked to domestic abuse post-COVID, including £16.6 million announced by MHCLG to go to 75 local authority projects for delivery of support to victims of domestic abuse and their children, £3.1 million from the Home Office for specialist services for children who've been directly and indirectly affected, and £28 million for a package of support for survivors of domestic abuse and their children from a fund from the Chancellor of the Exchequer. So a lot of money is quite rightly being directed in this area.
Lisa Williams.
Question number 12, please, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Burglary is a terrible crime, which can have a long-lasting impact on victims. And the CPS is committed to bringing robust prosecutions against offenders who commit burglary. and who ruin lives by doing so, the CPS will work with the police to ensure that the strongest possible evidence is put before the court. The latest CPS data, my honourable friend will be interested to know, shows that of those prosecuted for burglary, 87.9% are convicted.
I thank the Solicitor General for his answer. Many of my constituents in Chipping Barnet are really worried about burglary. Can I urge him to urge the police and the CPS to take this very seriously, because too often they seem to know who the burglars are, but charges, arrests and prosecutions just don't seem to follow up.
Well, she's quite right to focus on this point, and I know that my honourable friend has a track record of supporting her constituents in this area. The CPS is committed to bringing charges in all cases where the code test is met. If there's the evidence, if it meets the requisite standards, people will be prosecuted for burglary.
David Lind.
I speak regularly with my right honourable friend, the Lord Chancellor, on many matters, including manifesto commitments. The government committed to looking at the broader aspects of our constitution, including the balance between rights of individuals and effective government, and to updating the Human Rights Act. And I can assure the honourable member that any implications for the devolved administrations will be closely monitored.
David Lind.
Grateful to the Attorney-General. Last month, the Lord Chancellor referred to an independent review into the Human Rights Act of 1998. Can she clarify for me, is that different from the Constitution, Democracy and Rights Commission? And what role will devolved institutions have in any such review, given how important the HRA is to the devolved settlements?
Well, the government is ensuring that the impact of any reforms on devolved jurisdictions is well considered. Any consideration by the panel on its of UK-wide judicial review issues will also take into account the distinctive nature and context of each of the UK's jurisdictions. Where appropriate, the panel will put forward bespoke options to take into account these differences, rather than proposing a one-size-fits-all approach.
Stuart back on.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I very much regret that the Attorney-General doesn't seem to share my enthusiasm for the Human Rights Act, but she knows as well as anyone that messing about with it endangers future justice and security cooperation, as well as trade with the EU. So why doesn't the government put our safety, security and prosperity first and ditch the Tory party's Human Rights Act obsession?
Well, I share, I hope, his commitment to law enforcement and criminal justice work throughout our nations. And I believe deeply in our cooperation on criminal justice matters with our neighbours as well. What I do object to, however, is any submission to the European Court of Justice. And I am committed to our manifesto commitment, which is committed to looking at the Human Rights Act and updating it.
Cool. 15, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The scheme has had a number of recent successes. I'm pleased to inform the House of two in particular. This is the unduly lenient scheme. A recent case dealt with horrific offending concerning streaming child sexual abuse images online. The offender's sentence was increased from 1 year, 8 months imprisonment to 4 years imprisonment after I referred it. This was the first increase since that particular offence was brought within the scheme. In addition, I personally went to court to present the first controlling and coercive unduly lenient sentence, where the sentence was increased from a 2-year community order to 3 years immediate imprisonment.
Michael Logan. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Solicitor General recognise the importance of the fact that punishment must fit the crime, and for public confidence and also for my Dudley constituents?
Well, he's absolutely right to speak up for his constituents in Dudley on this matter. Public confidence in sentencing is absolutely crucial, and I'm delighted to say that the general public do have and should have confidence in sentencing. The reality is that a very tiny fraction, far less than 1%, has to be referred to the Court of Appeal for a review of sentence for undue leniency. And in his area, he might be interested to know of a case where a sentence of 2.5 years for possession of a sawn-off shotgun and other material was increased to 5 years when it was referred by me to the court.
Number 16, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The CPS has made changes to its system for paying fees to advocates to help support them during this difficult time, adjusted to ensure payment for work performed, even where a normal invoice trigger point has not been reached. The Ministry of Justice is also working closely with legal practitioners to understand the impact of COVID-19 on them, and the Legal Aid Agency have streamlined the process for interim payments and hardship payments, including lowering the threshold for when such claims can be made.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before the pandemic, many law firms were already struggling because of a decade of cuts to legal aid. What is the Solicitor General doing to ensure we have a functioning and fair criminal justice system when the crisis is over?
Well, prosecuting advocates play an essential role in our criminal justice system, and this government supports them, as has been seen by, of course, the recent influx of money from the Treasury to the Crown Prosecution Service. And on the 30th of March, the CPS announced measures enabling interim invoices to be raised. That's just one mechanism by which we're supporting criminal practitioners working on Crown Court cases. They're now able to claim hardship payments, for example, which have been expedited. There's millions of pounds in extra funding being provided for not-for-profit providers. So we're supporting the legal community across the board in what I accept are very difficult times.
In order to allow the safe exit of honourable members participating in this item of business and the safe arrival of those participating in the next, I am now suspending the House for 3 minutes. Order. Right.
Urgent question, Sir Peter Bottomley.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for allowing the question. To ask the Secretary of State for Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs
if he'll make a statement on whether he'll use the UK's constructive dialogue with the government of Bahrain publicly to raise the case of 2 prisoners who've been sentenced to death following torture and who face a hearing this Monday when their death sentences may be confirmed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK and Bahrain continue to have a close and important relationship. We benefit from an ongoing, open and genuine dialogue in which we work together on mutually beneficial issues whilst also raising points of significant difference with one another. It is because of this long-standing partnership that we're able to have candid conversations about matters of importance to the UK, in particular our human rights concerns. Our relationship allows us to raise sensitive and difficult issues, both privately and publicly, in a constructive manner in order to uphold our moral responsibility on human rights issues. We have and will continue to raise the cases both of Mohammed Ramadan and Hussein Musa at senior levels with the government of Bahrain. On the 8th of January, on the 8th of January, British Embassy Myanmar officials attended the final session of the Court of Appeal for the retrial of the 2 men mentioned. Both individuals were convicted of terrorist charges and given the death sentence again. On the 8th of January, the former Minister for the Middle East and North Africa publicly stated our deep concern that the death sentences were again handed out, and the UK's position has not changed on this matter. We continue to actively monitor these 2 cases as they are taken to the Court of Cassation for final review. The UK's position on the use of death penalty is long-standing and unequivocal. We oppose its use in all circumstances and in all countries as a matter of principle. The government of Bahrain is fully aware of our view. This was made explicitly clear by the former Minister for the Middle East and North Africa to a senior Bahraini counterpart last year. It was then reinforced by my noble friend the Lord Ahmed in the other place, who issued a public statement expressing the UK's opposition to the use of the death penalty in response to actions taken in Bahrain. I can assure the House that our efforts to raise these cases and also the broader issues of the use of capital punishment with the Bahrain authorities will continue. Bahrain is a Foreign and Commonwealth Office human rights priority country, in part due to its policy surrounding the death penalty. We continue to monitor developments on all matters that relate to human rights within the country. We remain absolutely committed to the promotion of universal freedoms and upholding human rights globally. And this has been made clear just this week with the introduction of the UK's first autonomous human rights sanction regime. Thank you, sir.
Peter. Mr. Speaker, the House will be grateful to the Minister. I want to make plain that the first constituency case I took was of someone who I thought had been wrongly convicted in this country. It took 5 years to establish that. I'm working on 2 long-term cases in the United States of America. Bahrain is important to us politically, diplomatically and militarily, and we hope it's a mutual relationship. We know that there are times when the Bahrain, as a sovereign country, has paid attention to outside prompting, and we hope that with respect they'll listen to what's said here, what was said in another place yesterday, and in the 3 debates which have taken place in Parliament during the last year or so. Can I ask that the views of Parliament are put to the Bahrain authorities with our respectful greetings and say that if either the Court of Cassation on Monday or a sovereign intervention of intervening would make a difference, that will be noticed and appreciated, and it will affect the way Bahrain is seen. I don't need to say what would happen if that does not happen. I wish these men well, I wish Bahrain well, and I hope that the work by this House, by Amnesty International, by Reprieve and by Human Rights Watch will get the proper attention it deserves.
Yeah. Mr. Speaker, I know that the Bahrainis do take seriously the views of the United Kingdom and indeed this House. We as yet do not know what the outcome of the Court of Cassation will be. If the death penalty is handed down again, I can assure the House that our opposition to the death penalty will be restated at both official and ministerial level to the government of Bahrain.
Shadow Minister Stephen Doherty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I commend the honourable gentleman on his question on this crucial matter. Trials based on evidence secured through torture, including allegations that interrogators threatened to rape the wife of Mohammed Ramadan in front of him after a series of brutal beatings, and hung Hussein Musa from the ceiling for 3 days while beating his genitals with batons. And finally, they have been sentenced to death. So condemnation of the trials of these two men has been almost universal from many of the organisations the honourable gentleman referred to. All have condemned the use of torture and all have called for their death sentences to be quashed. And yet, unfortunately, we've yet to see a decisive statement on this from the government. And worse still, the two Bahraini security bodies that enabled this torture, the Special Investigations Unit and the Ombudsman for the Ministry of the Interior, were funded by this government. So the government says that it engages with the Bahraini government on human rights, on the use of torture and on the death penalty, and I've listened carefully to what the Minister said. But where are the results from that engagement, Mr. Speaker, given this case and many others? And since 2012, the government's provided over 5 million of technical assistance, and yet the number of executions has increased and human rights abuses have increased. The Foreign Secretary spoke earlier this week about Magnitsky sanctions, absolutely rightly so, and the UK's importance of human rights and opposing the death penalty, opposing torture. So will the Minister in that light now condemn the use of torture by the security forces in Bahrain in these two cases rather than just monitoring the case? Will he raise this matter? Will the Prime Minister raise this matter with the King? Will he raise it directly with his opposite number? Will he press the government of Bahrain to establish an independent commission of inquiry to conduct an Istanbul Protocol-compliant investigation into the torture allegations for these two men? Will he freeze assistance to the Bahraini security bodies that are potentially implicated in this case? And will he publish the human rights assessments and indeed the assessments against the OSJA guidance, which the Foreign Office is supposed to use when funding these programmes, to assess whether or not the programmes of support are implicated in torture and the use of the death penalty? It's one thing, Mr. Speaker, for the Foreign Secretary to speak of taking action against those complicit in torture, the death penalty, those who are blood-drenched, but it's another for the government to walk the walk. So time is of the essence in this case. Will the Minister speak out? Will this government speak out at the highest levels and do what it can to get this death sentence commuted?
Listen.
I thank the honourable gentleman for the points that he's raised. I can assure him that the United Kingdom government, Her Majesty's government, opposes torture as well as the death penalty, and that has been communicated widely and regularly, and that is well known around the world. He makes reference to the OSJA process, and I can assure him that that is a robust process that ensures that when the British government interacts or trains or supports other governments around the world, that training or support is not used to facilitate human rights abuses. This is a process which constantly reviews our relationships, and I'm confident is robust. With regard to the oversight bodies he mentioned, it should be noted that those oversight bodies have brought about a change in the way that Bahrain works. Yes. There have been police officers and prison officers who have been brought to justice because of the oversight bodies that we support. The Bahraini government has demonstrated, in fact the Bahraini royal family have demonstrated a desire to improve their structures, their transparency and the resilience of their governmental structures, and these oversight bodies that we support are a part of that. And whilst they continue to express the desire to improve their structures and head in a positive direction, we will maintain our support to enable them to do so. As I said, Bahrain remains a human rights priority country. We wish to see improvement where the government expresses desire to implement that improvement. We will continue to support them to do so.
Chair of the Select Committee, Tom Tugendar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome very much the urgent question by my right honourable friend, the member for Worthing West. And I draw my right honourable friend, the Minister's attention to the Foreign Affairs Committee report of 2018, where we raised questions about this funding because of the torture that we've seen of Mr. Ramadan and Mr. Musa. Could I urge him to think very hard about the position of Her Majesty's government on this? And could I urge him as well to write to His Majesty King Hamad and remind him Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, the most compassionate, the most merciful, are the names that are given to the Prophet, peace be upon him. And so perhaps this may be one of those moments where His Highness could think hard, His Majesty could think hard about the decisions that are before him.
I thank my honourable friend for the points that he's raised, and his points are very well made. I think one of the advantages of having over 200 years of relationship with the Bahraini is that we can speak candidly, we can speak clearly, and we can speak at the highest levels. We are comfortable, more than comfortable, to reiterate our position, our opposition to the death penalty and torture, and we are happy to restate that at the highest levels within Bahraini society.
We head to the SNP spokesperson on this, Brendan O'Hara. Brendan O'Hara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as the SNP spokesperson on international human rights and as chair of the APPG on democracy and human rights in the Gulf, I congratulate the honourable member for Worthing West in securing this urgent question. The Minister and his FCO colleagues will know I've become something of a serial correspondent on this issue recently, as recourse to the death penalty in Bahrain has become increasingly commonplace. Mr. Speaker, since 2012, the United Kingdom has been providing Bahrain with what it calls technical assistance. And that technical assistance is designed to build effective and accountable institutions, strengthen the rule of law, and assist with police and judicial reform. It's clearly not happening, because given that the International Rehabilitation Council for Torture Victims has declared that the investigation of this case was carried out by the Bahrain Special Investigation Unit and it was seriously flawed, it failed to meet even the minimum standards of international recognition and breached the Istanbul Protocol. Will the Minister now urgently review that technical assistance programme to Bahrain, and will he agree to suspend it immediately if these death sentences are carried out?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, and the point I made in response to the Shadow Minister is that the OSJAR process, which is designed to ensure that where the United Kingdom government provides assistance to a foreign government, that does not in any way help to facilitate human rights abuses, as I say, is robust. It is held constantly in review, and we review our relationships regularly. So obviously, by definition, our relationship with Bahrain and any future technical assistance will be assessed against the criteria that we have put out. I would, however, say that a number of the oversight bodies are only in existence because of the strength of the relationship between the United Kingdom and the government of Bahrain, and where those bodies are seeking to improve, to become more transparent, more robust, we will seek to help them do so. If we disengage, then I do not believe that that would actually be conducive to improving the human rights situation in Bahrain.
We now head to Bosworth to Dr. Luke Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for his comments on this case. And building up on that engagement, I wonder what action the government's taking to make sure Bahrain is meeting its human rights obligations, and wider still, what steps is my right honourable friend taking to continue to position the UK at the forefront of promoting human rights, to make sure that rights really are respected both in Bahrain but across the world?
I thank my honourable friend for his question. The UK government remains committed to promoting universal freedoms and human rights around the world. It is and will remain at the heart of our foreign policy and will ensure that the UK remains a force for good. Being able to promote human rights cannot just be done in the abstract, and it is easy to do so from these green benches. To be a real meaningful champion of human rights, we have to have influence on governments. As I say, Bahrain is a human rights priority country, and through our close relationship with Bahrain, we seek to persuade and support them on a journey to improve their human rights situation. And that is how effective governments operate.
6 and 7 are withdrawn, so I go to Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. With only 5 days to save their lives and in light of the UK assistance to the bodies that enable their torture and death sentences, can the Minister confirm the Government will make effective representation to the cases of Mohammed Ramadan and Hussein Musa before the Court of Cassation's final decision on Monday? Thank you.
I thank the Honourable Lady for the point that she's raised. As I've said before, it's the strength of our relationship between the UK and Bahrain that allows us to have frank, candid and regular conversations at both senior official, ministerial and head of state level about a whole range of things. I can assure her that if the death penalties are upheld through the Court of Cassation process, that the UK will both publicly and loudly remind Bahrain of our opposition to the death penalty, and we will continue to seek to have that set aside.
We now head to Wellingborough with Peter Bone. Peter Bone.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Listening to the excellent Minister, I'm wondering perhaps whether the comments should be made in private to Bahrain rather than necessarily in public to get the result that everyone wants. But can I ask him in particular about freedom of the press in Bahrain, because a free press helps guarantee human rights. And what efforts are being made to ensure that there is freedom of the press in Bahrain?
I thank my honourable friend. One of the first events that I took part in upon being appointed as a minister was the Foreign and Commonwealth Office hosting journalists from North Africa and the Middle East to support media freedom. And media freedom remains a priority for the UK government. There is planned legislation in Bahrain to provide additional protection to journalists. However, the timing and detail around that legislation remains vague. We continue to engage at senior level to push for this legislation to be brought forward and for the protections of journalists to be protected and enhanced in Bahrain.
To Scotland to visit Margaret Farray. Margaret Farray.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As co-chair of the Parliamentary Human Rights Group, on Monday myself and my honourable friend, the member for Argyll and Bute, wrote to the FCO requesting an urgent meeting regarding the cases of Mohammed Ramadan and Hussein Musa. With less than 1 week to save these two people's lives, and in light of the UK assistance to the Special Investigations Unit that enabled their torture and imminent death sentences, will he meet with us to discuss these cases before the Court of Cassation's final decision on Monday?
Mr Speaker, I am always happy to meet with parliamentary colleagues about important issues like this. The timing of the likely timing of the Court of Cassation judgment may make it difficult to do so before Monday. However, I can assure her that we will continue to make every effort to prevent the death penalty, whether it be in Bahrain or more widely. And I can assure her that even if the death penalty is upheld by the Court of Cassation, that will not be the end of our efforts to prevent the death penalty in Bahrain. But as I say, I'm more than happy to facilitate a meeting with her and parliamentary colleagues.
Rob Butler.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I wonder if my right honourable friend could tell the House what wider measures his department is taking to ensure political reform and democratic accountability in Bahrain.
I thank my honourable friend. Bahrain remains one of only 2 countries in the Gulf with an elected parliament. And UK support has strengthened the institutional capacity of the Bahraini Parliament's Secretariat. We've enhanced staff skills to support MPs in their oversight of the government. And in addition, we have helped local NGOs raise Bahraini youth awareness of democracy and parliamentary work. And we will continue to pursue these things.
Mr Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Minister will know that when it comes to engaging with countries in the Gulf, and I chair the APPG on Qatar, amongst others, that I preach a sermon of pragmatism and a humility in engaging with these countries. But surely We can only encourage progress if we see it actually happening, and expressing desire for change is not good enough. The OSJA process that the Minister relies on is one that has been criticised by the Home Affairs Select Committee as being not fit for purpose. So if he is going to rely on that OSJA process, will he publish the assessment that was carried out under it in relation to this assistance, and will he in fact promote within government an overhaul of that whole process?
I thank the honourable gentleman for the points that he's made. It was a Conservative Foreign Secretary that brought in the OSJA process, and as I have said, it is by its definition one that is constantly under review, and we seek to always improve it. But I would make the point that the oversight bodies that have been criticised in this chamber today are only recently in existence, and their existence is in a significant part because of the work that the UK government has done with the Bahrainis. There is a desire to see these organisations and their processes improve, and our technical assistance is part of that improvement programme. It would be, I think, entirely counterproductive to suggest that these organisations are dispensed with, because I cannot see how that would increase or improve the oversight of the human rights situation. So therefore the aim surely should be to improve them, and it's through our close working relationship that we do seek to improve them.
Hendra.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would my right honourable friend outline to the House what steps the government has taken to ensure Bahrain is clear on the UK's position regarding human rights?
I thank my honourable friend. I think the best way of ensuring that Bahrain understands our position is to say it loudly, and to say it regularly, and to say it directly. And as I say, we have had a relationship of over 2 centuries with the Bahrainis, and that does give us perhaps a unique ability to speak candidly and frankly at the very highest levels. And I can assure my honourable friend that we will continue to do so.
We're heading to Dundee West with Chris Law. Chris Law.
Mr. Speaker, when the Foreign Secretary announced the imposition of Magnitsky-style powers to sanction those complicit in human rights violations and abuses earlier this week, he said, "This country makes it crystal clear to those who abuse their power to inflict unimaginable suffering that we won't look the other way. Therefore, will the Minister confirm that the UK government will impose a human rights sanction on both individuals and organisations and Bahraini authorities who have been complicit in the torture of Mohammed Ramadan and Hussein Musa?"
Mr. Speaker, I was incredibly proud when my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, announced the UK's independent sanctions regime and demonstrated both to the House and to the world that the United Kingdom takes human rights abuses seriously and will deal with them. Whilst we were a member of the European Union's human rights sanctions regime, we had a convention where we did not discuss potential future sanctions, and that remains the convention under our domestic sanctions regime.
Speaker, can I congratulate my right honourable friend, the Father of the House, for bringing forward this urgent question in such a timely manner. Would my right honourable friend, the Minister, agree with me that cutting our modest and highly monitored technical assistance to Bahrain, particularly the SIU, the Special Investigations Unit, and the Ombudsman, would likely make matters worse? And will he use the influence that he has with Bahrain and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to ensure that judiciary is distanced from the executive, and also that sentencing discretion is reduced in those 2 countries, since it too often produces perverse and unpredictable outcomes?
I thank my honourable friend and my predecessor, who knows better than many the nature of our relationship, and I commend him for the work that he did directly on this issue with the Bahrainis. As I have found in many cases, both public and privately, that I commend the work that he's done and agree wholeheartedly with it. It is the strength of our relationship, the long-standing, strong and powerful relationship between the governments of the UK and the government of Bahrain that allows us to support improvements when they're put in place, to ensure those oversight bodies improve their independence and their effectiveness, and we will continue to push for that improvement.
Heading to Greater Manchester to visit Andrew Gwynn. Andrew Gwynn.
Thank you, and can I thank the Minister for his statement arising from this urgent question. This is now very serious, given that both Mohammed Ramadan and Hussein Musa are at risk of imminent execution should their sentence, based on a torture-obtained confession, be upheld in 5 days' time. So will the Minister ask our ambassador to Bahrain urgently to attend their trial in Bahrain as an international observer?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. And actually, one of the byproducts of the strength of our relationship is the ability of Her Majesty's ambassador to attend trials of this nature in Bahrain. I've spoken with Her Majesty's ambassador to Bahrain on a number of occasions, most recently, in fact, this morning, about this very issue. And I can assure the honourable gentleman that we remain fully engaged, that he and his team are fully engaged in the country. And if the Court of Cassation hands down a death sentence again, we will continue. We will not stop at that point. We will continue to dissuade the Bahrainis from utilising the death penalty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank my right honourable friend for the comments he's made so far. It's clear that our relationship with Bahrain is not just strong and deep diplomatically, but exists across a range of measures from business to the armed forces. So could he reassure the House that we'll use that range of channels to encourage diplomatic, human rights and political reform in Bahrain?
Thank my honourable friend for the points that he's raised, and he is absolutely right that the strength of relationship with Bahrain stretches across a number of areas: commercial, military, security, social. And I've said a number of times, but I think it's worth repeating, it is because of the strength of our relationship, the long-standing relationship, that we are able to have difficult conversations with the Bahrainis around issues like press freedom and human rights.
There are 24 prisoners on death row in Bahrain, 10 in imminent danger of execution, including Zahir Abdullah and Hussein Rashid, whose cases I raised with the Foreign Secretary in his statement on human rights abuses on Monday. His reply that the designation of abusers would be blind to ulterior considerations, somewhat undermined by the Trade Secretary's decision the next day to resume arms trade with Saudi Arabia. So will the Minister look again at the responsibility of individuals in the Bahraini regime, and in particular Prince Nasser bin Hamad, the son of the king, who's alleged to have been involved in torture going back to the Arab Spring, and whose diplomatic immunity was removed by the High Court here?
Minister. The honourable gentleman conflates two fundamentally different issues when he talks about the export licences and our sanctions regime. The sanctions regime that my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, put forward this week highlights the huge importance that Her Majesty's government puts to enhancing and protecting human rights. And those individuals that were sanctioned, I'm very proud of the fact that we were able to put those into force. We will continue to protect human rights, and we will continue to encourage governments around the world, including governments in the Gulf, to improve their record on human rights. And we will do so both publicly and privately, and in whatever the most effective way is.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that the right to a fair trial is enshrined in the Constitution of Bahrain, and therefore we must encourage the government of Bahrain to follow due process in all cases?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. This is something that the Bahraini government have demonstrated a desire to improve. They want to have free a judicial system. They want to have a robust judicial system, and we want to help them do so. And it's through that, it's through the technical assistance that we will help to encourage the improvements in these core institutions of Bahraini society.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Under Britain's Integrated Activity Fund, the Special Investigation Unit in Bahrain has received UK taxpayer-funded training through the College of Policing. Now, this institution is now shown to be complicit in the whitewashed investigation which led to these men's death sentences being reimposed. Will my right honourable friend now halt any support to these Bahraini oversight institutions which have demonstrated to do no more than facilitate whitewashing of human rights abuses and allow an escalation of the death penalty to be used in that country?
Minister. The Foreign and Commonwealth Office does not currently provide funding or training to the Bahraini Royal Academy of Policing. The UK has been providing a range of technical, practical assistance to the government of Bahrain since 2013, as I say, to bring about improvements in the robustness of their oversight bodies. Where abuses have taken place, actually those public servants have been brought to justice, and my understanding is that 97 police officers or prison officers have been brought to justice, in significant part because of the oversight bodies that the UK government has helped to strengthen and improve.
Stewart. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I understand, and nobody's mentioned this so far, that both men were convicted on one confession and also on forensic evidence, victims and witness testimonies, as well as mobile phone records, including text messages which coordinated the actual attack, which lured police officers into a deadly trap. One policeman was killed, others, including civilians, were badly hurt. I visited Bahrain's independent human rights oversight body, and I was impressed actually by its independence and involvement, and also its reports. It can go anywhere. I do not support the death penalty, and I hope that if this sentence is upheld on Monday, His Majesty the King of Bahrain will commute the sentences. However, would the Minister agree with me that Bahrain's judiciary system is pretty fair and very open to scrutiny, especially looking around the rest of the Middle East?
I thank my honourable and gallant friend for the points that he has raised. I'm not in a position to go into detail about all the evidence that was put forward in the trial of these two men, but make the point that the oversight bodies that the UK government supports have been able to conduct oversight of the process, and indeed the Court of Cassation is providing oversight of the process. We want to support the judiciary in Bahrain to continue to improve, and indeed we're very pleased that following work that we've done with the Bahrainis, they're now moving to alternative sentencing to reduce the number of people in incarceration, to learn from the UK about how that might be used to reduce the prison population, to reduce overcrowding in prisons. And we want to continue to support the Bahrainis as they move in the right direction when it comes to their criminal justice system.
22 withdrawn, so we'll go to Felicity Buck.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The vast majority of residents in Kensington want to see the end of the death penalty across the world. What steps is Her Majesty's government taking to achieve that end?
I thank the honourable lady, my honourable friend, for the point that she's raised, and she's absolutely right. The UK, both in society and in government, are opposed to the death penalty across the world. We make that point clear, and we make that point clear regularly to our friends around the world, and we will continue to push for that in general. And indeed, in the instance of these two individuals, if, and I remind that the decision has not been made, if the Court of Cassation upholds the death penalty, we will continue to lobby the Bahrainis for that not to be imposed in this case.
We now head to Wakefield to visit Imran Hamid Khan. Press the mute button.
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The United Kingdom and the Kingdom of Bahrain enjoy a close and enduring relationship born out of friendship, and marked by genuine affection and mutual respect. British values, not race or religion, characterise our people, and we place the sanctity of human rights above all considerations. This being indisputable, will my right honourable friend confirm to the House that human rights remain at the heart of Her Majesty's government's every policy, including its foreign policies, and this is exemplified by its designation of Bahrain as a human rights priority country?
My honourable friend is right. Human rights are absolutely at the heart of this government's foreign policy, and it's a topic that I discuss regularly, both with my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, and my noble friend, Lord Ahmed of Wimbledon, who leads for Her Majesty's government on human rights. And we will continue to push for improvements on human rights around the world to all our friends and partners internationally. That will remain, I can assure him and the House, that will remain absolutely at the heart of the foreign policy. It is a point for which the Prime Minister, as I say, my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, are rightly proud.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Following on from the question from the Honourable Member for Glasgow East, the UK's College of Policing was continuing to provide training to the Ombudsman for the Ministry of the Interior and the Bahraini Special Investigations Unit in 2019. Can the Minister inform the House what the College of Policing's training covers on the treatment of prisoners, the use of torture and the threat of death penalty against prisoners?
As I've said to the House on a number of occasions during this session, the United Kingdom strongly opposes the use of the death penalty and the use of torture. Our technical assistance to these oversight bodies is to ensure that they improve in terms of their effectiveness and their transparency. That is what the work that the UK government, in conjunction with the Bahraini government, is seeking to achieve, and we will continue to push for improved accountability, transparency and effectiveness of these oversight bodies.
Kieran Millen.
Can I begin by thanking the constituents of mine that raised this issue with me? I think it serves as a reminder to the Bahraini government of how badly these cases can affect their reputation amongst residents of the world, including Crewe and Nantwich. We've covered the importance of judicial reform and political reform. Could my honourable friend update us as to what progress we've made in discussing freedom of religion with the Bahraini royal family?
I thank my honourable friend for the point that he's raised. And freedom of religion is also one of the cornerstones of our force for good within UK foreign policy. My honourable friend, the member for Raynham, and I apologise very badly if I've got his constituency wrong. No, so it is Raynham. I do apologise. And I will update the House, but who works with the Foreign and Commonwealth Office in terms of the protection for religious freedom, will take an interest in the point that he's made. We also very much impress upon our friends around the world the importance of religious freedom, and we will do so with regard to Bahrain as well.
Nichols.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If their death sentences are confirmed, Mohammed Ramadan and Hussein Musa will have exhausted all of their legal remedies and will face imminent execution. What is the Minister's assessment of the efficacy of the government's encouragement of Bahrain to follow due process and meet its international human rights obligations?
Well, as I've said, the existence of these oversight bodies is in part because of the work that the UK has done with Bahrain, and we will seek to continue to improve the effectiveness and transparency of those oversight bodies, and that will be an enduring function of our relationship with the Bahrainis.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend has already made reference to this in a previous question, but given the key importance that a truly free press has in ensuring human rights, could he provide further assurances to this House that this government will take every possible step to safeguard press freedoms in Bahrain?
I thank my honourable friend. As I said, we do have concerns about the diversity of press in Bahrain. It's part of the reason why Bahrain remains a human rights priority country for the UK. As I say, we know that there is proposed legislation, and we will encourage the Bahrainis to bring this forward swiftly.
Heading to the North East, visiting Eamons. Eamons!
Very grateful, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it seems to be the case, and I want to understand why the FCO has defended the Bahraini Ombudsman and the Special Investigation Unit, which it seems to want to improve, in their clearly flawed and heavily influenced investigations in the extraction of so-called confessions by torture from Mohammed and Hussein. If we are to have any continuing measure of international legitimacy, we mustn't be seen to be supporting regimes and agencies within regimes that whitewash allegations of torture, resulting in totally disgraceful death sentences on bogus charges simply for voicing dissent. Mr. Speaker, there's no time to monitor a journey by Bahrain on human rights. I appeal to the Minister not to rest for a second on this issue, and it's a matter of justice and life and death.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, a number of honourable and right honourable members have raised these oversight bodies. It is important that there is oversight of the process, so oversight bodies need to exist. It is important that those oversight bodies improve, and we are seeking to improve those oversight bodies. The government of Bahrain desires to improve those oversight bodies, and we are helping them to do so. So where a government or a country where we have had relations for over 2 centuries explicitly seeks to improve the transparency, the effectiveness and the resilience of its institutions, we will seek to help them provide that improvement.
In order to allow the safe exit of honourable members participating in this item of business and the safe arrival of those participating in the next, I am now suspending the House for 3 minutes. Order. Order. I now call, we come to business questions. The Shadow Leader of the House, Valerie Bass.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Leader of the House please give us the forthcoming business?
Leader of the House.
Mr. Speaker, the business for the week commencing the 13th of July will include Monday, the 13th of July, proceedings on the Supply and Appropriation Main Estimates Bill, followed by consideration of a procedural motion, followed by all stages of the Stamp Duty Land Tax Temporary Relief Bill, followed by motion relating to the membership of the Intelligence and Security Committee. Tuesday, the 14th of July, remaining stages of the Parliamentary Constituencies Bill. Wednesday, the 15th of July, Opposition Day, 10th allotted day. There will be a debate on a motion in the name of the Scottish National Party, subject to be announced, followed by a motion to approve a statutory instrument relating to terrorism. Thursday, the 16th of July, second reading of the Non-Domestic Rating Public Lavatories Bill. Followed by general debate on restoration and renewal. Friday, the 17th of July, the House will not be sitting.
Valerie Bass.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Leader for the business next week and thank him for arranging the statement later today on Baroness Cumberledge's report. Excellent report, First Do No Harm. But I want to acknowledge the persistence of my honourable friend, the member for Bolton South East. She started asking questions in 2011 and has managed to lobby 3 Prime Ministers. And as a result of that, we've seen this excellent report where the survivors finally get justice. Mr. Speaker, the Shadow Chancellor said thanks for the meal deal, but we were promised a new deal. We don't appear to have had that new deal. We're encouraged to eat out. I'm just wondering whether in the autumn statement there'll be vouchers for the gym. But the Chancellor was right when he said there is a nobility of work. Where is the nobility of work for the 12,000 staff at British Airways? Where is the nobility of work for the staff of 3,000 people at Rolls-Royce? The nobility of work for our manufacturing sector. In JLR in the West Midlands, they're losing over 1,000 jobs. Our hard-pressed health workers have no pay rise, and the retail sector, again, was left out. Nothing for local newspapers who said they'd like a further business rate holiday. The News Media Association say that since the start of the pandemic, their advertising revenue has been reduced by 80%. I wonder if that could be inserted into the debate next week. Mr. Speaker, if the Prime Minister won't apologise, I wonder if the Leader of the Opposition would perhaps give us a mea culpa. On the 30th of April, I had this from a manager of a residential home, care home in my constituency. She said, "We've only just had our number of deaths declared, which is appalling. We alone lost 8 residents, our little family. We have let families see them when they are near to the end of their lives. We've had lots of sad moments, and just a thought had been given to us? No, we are the forgotten ones. Many sleepless nights have been done thinking of our beloved residents, our family. We would just like some equality to the NHS. We deserve a national badge like the NHS." Mr. Speaker, carers have left their home to stay in residential homes to look after the residents there. Now, if the Prime Minister has said too many care homes don't really follow procedures, does he really know about procedures? Is it following procedures when you go to Durham for an eye test or if you go to your holiday home in Greece? If he won't apologise, perhaps he could cover the cost of TV licences for the over 70s. Now, Age UK said 9 in 10 respondents said that TV was the most important to them since the pandemic. Could that be inserted into the package next week to cover that social policy? Now, there's no business for the third week after this one. Could he schedule time for a debate on EDM 593? The Honourable Member for Sutton and Sheen, the Business Minister, said there would be an independent review in the House. He said there would be on horizon the IT scandal. It's now a month since he made that statement. The government website said it will be shortly. The EDM is calling for a judge-led independent inquiry. People have served custodial sentences, gone bankrupt, and they were totally innocent. This is what the judge said when he gave judgment. He said the Post Office has resisted timely resolution of this group litigation, meaning that the Post Office were dragging it out so the victims didn't get any recompense as much as they should have done. It was all tied up in legal fees. This was a terrible injustice. We need to learn the lessons. And the statement for the £1.57 billion for the arts, could we have clarification? Because it doesn't contain clear guidelines on funding, scope, timing or eligibility. The statement says the guidelines will be made shortly. Could we have a statement on exactly what the guidelines are and when shortly is? Now, I'm a bit upset, Mr. Speaker, because the Leader of the House doesn't appear to be answering my questions about Nazanin, Anousheh, Kylie, and of course Luke Simons. Could we have an update? There's been Foreign Office questions and even a statement by the Foreign Minister on global human rights. And finally, could we have an urgent debate on our borders and smuggling? It seems there might be some dispute within Cabinet.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I answer straight away the Right Honourable Lady's question on Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, because, as I promised last week, I have taken this up with the Foreign Office. I've spoken to a minister at the Foreign Office, and I can give her the reassurance that I hope will provide some comfort that this is absolutely top of their list of priorities and they are continuing to work to secure her release. So that is a matter taken seriously by the Foreign Office, as it should be. I too share her wish to congratulate the Honourable Lady, the member for Bolton South East, and the terrific work she did, which led ultimately to the Cumberledge report. I was actually a member of her APPG on Primados, and I think the work done there is of fundamental importance. I'm pleased and welcome the Cumberledge report, which the government is of course looking into before responding to fully, but it is an example of how this place can be used to make things happen and to make things change using procedures within Parliament, and I think that is always welcome. I'm not quite sure whether the Right Honourable Lady welcomed the New Deal or not. I thought she was just a little grudging about this incredible support that is being provided to businesses up and down the country, and the record is really quite remarkable. 9.3 million jobs on the furlough scheme, costing taxpayer £25.5 billion, 2.6 million self-employed people being supported, £7.7 billion. If that doesn't show that the government understands the nobility of work, I don't know what does. That the government has put taxpayers' money where its mouth is to ensure that jobs are protected, are kept, that the structure of the economy is maintained. And the next package is a £30 billion package. And this is really important to understand the fundamentally different nature of this crisis from the one that hit in 2008. In 2008, we were facing a crisis of over-expenditure, bad management of the economy, and fundamental failings. This is a collapse in demand created by a pandemic, and the right response is fundamentally different from the one that we had in 2010, which has very successfully left us in a position where we can afford these extraordinary but necessary measures. The Right Honourable Lady mentioned the concerns about care homes, and I think the work done by people in care homes has been quite remarkable under the most difficult circumstances, and the government has done everything that it can to support them. This has partly been through the funds sent to local authorities and the £600 million infections funds to ensure that the money is there to help care homes, but the overhaul of the way PPE is delivered to ensure that that is available to people in care homes, and to ensure that the workforce is expanded through a new recruitment campaign so that people are there to help where they are needed. But I share her view that the work done in care homes is of fundamental importance, and I would dispute her conclusion that they have been forgotten. They have not been forgotten, and they are very much valued. TV licences, well, I think her message will be heard by the BBC, and let's say to Auntie, come on, let's be nice to the over 75-year-olds, as they are some of your most loyal viewers and listeners, and it would be right to allow them to continue to watch television for free. As regards EDM 593 and the Horizon scandal, there is no worse scandal than when people are imprisoned or have their livelihoods taken away unjustly when they are accused of crimes that they did not commit. The seriousness of what she raised is well known, and again it shows how the procedures of this House may be used to right wrongs, our historic role of redress of grievance. We had an urgent question on the money going to the arts, and amazingly, for once, a government package was actually welcomed by everybody, and I think there's a great triumph of my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Culture generally, who managed to put together an amazing package supporting some of our most valued institutions, and that is, I think, extraordinarily welcome. And finally, on the borders issues, the borders issues will be sorted out, that things are working, that there is a deadline set for July of next year, and we will always emphasise the unity of the United Kingdom.
We now come to Caroline Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Chancellor's Eat Out to Help Out voucher scheme for August is an absolute lifeline to the local economy in Eastbourne, and I hope will promote well-being in bringing people together, with the ministerial team working so very hard at present to bring back gyms, leisure centres and pools. I wonder if, complementary then to this scheme, we might consider access to such places and schemes so that we can equally promote the physical well-being and get the nation up and running.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for her question. I can't claim to be a native gym goer personally. I did have to go occasionally in my childhood, and have never quite recovered from the experience. But many people up and down the country will be very keen to get back to sports centres, gymnasiums and swimming pools, to get themselves into peak physical performance. And they can then compensate by eating out to get back the calories that they've just worn off when they have been in the gymnasium. And the voucher scheme is time limited just for a period to boost hospitality businesses and encourage people to unleash the latent demand that has been pent up over the last few months in a particularly vulnerable sector that employs millions of people. So I hope she understands that we're not able to offer this support to all sectors in the economy, but I'm sure that my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, will look to support some industries which come under acute pressures in coming months.
We now head up to Scotland for the SNP spokesperson, Tommy Shepherd.
Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor must be peeved that his grand announcement yesterday received such a mixed response, with many industry bodies saying it is insufficient. When we debate these plans on Monday, will the leader try to persuade his friend to listen to others and seek consensus? It is increasingly bizarre that the Chancellor insists on a one-size-fits-all approach to business support when everyone else knows that different sectors are affected differently. The fact is that come the autumn, there will be many businesses which would in normal circumstances be perfectly viable, but which cannot trade because of public health restrictions. As the chief strategist of JP Morgan said yesterday, removing the furlough scheme before activity has recovered is like building 3/4 of a bridge and not finishing it because it is becoming expensive. Secondly, I want to ask again for a debate on the financial straitjacket under which the devolved administrations are forced to operate. Now, every time I ask about devolution powers, the leader gives me an answer about money. I'm not sure if he is evading the question or whether he does not understand it. The fiscal framework of devolution was not designed to respond to a global pandemic, and it needs to be changed. To give this week's example, the arts rescue package announced on Monday includes repurposing capital spending in England. Why will the government not allow the Scottish government to do the same? Now, we hear from many cabinet members that Scotland's salvation is due to the strong arms of the Union, implying that only big countries can deal with the pandemic. But that's not true. In fact, many small countries have proven more agile and effective. But if the leader does believe this, can he explain why support for Scotland becoming an independent country is now running at 54%, an all-time historic high? And finally, Mr. Speaker, can the leader confirm whether in next week's debate about restoration and renewal, the government will bring forward its own revised plans? In particular, does he believe that the decision to build a complete replica of the House of Commons chamber for a temporary decant is profligate and ought to be reviewed?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable gentleman is concerned that the Chancellor is peeved, but as we look down, or his happy countenance down upon us, we know that in his cheerful and jolly and bonhomous way, he himself would never be peeved. It is hard to think of a less peevish person. He talks about the furlough scheme. And my right honourable friend the Chancellor is absolutely right. The furlough scheme cannot go on forever. It has been an amazing effort by the taxpayer to ensure that the structure of the economy is maintained and that therefore it can be a V-shaped recovery. But the government, the taxpayer, cannot afford indefinitely to provide this level of support, and therefore October seems to me to be about the same date. Now, the honourable gentleman complains that he doesn't like the answer that I give him on the fiscal settlement for Scotland. But I have good news for him, because the figure I gave him last week is lower than the figure I shall give him this week. That because of the strength of the United Kingdom, the Barnett consequentials have led to £4.6 billion being available to be spent in Scotland. And this shows the success of economic management of the United Kingdom over 10 years of coalition and Conservative government. The ability to answer the challenges of 2008, to ensure that the public sector finances got back into proper shape so that we were in the position where we could afford to deal with a fundamentally different crisis which required a different response, which required the expenditure of taxpayers' money, is a tribute to the strength of the United Kingdom. And where would Scotland be had they gone for independence in 2014 with their revenue dependent on the oil price that has subsequently collapsed? They would be bankrupt, Mr. Speaker. Bankrupt. He calls for bankruptcy. Her Majesty's government has provided solvency and support for the people of the whole of the United Kingdom. And I would say, in regard to the debate on restoration and renewal, we will debate that next week.
Butler. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Buckinghamshire has more micro businesses than any other county in the country, and consequently a large number of directors of very small companies. Many of these directors pay themselves primarily through dividends to reflect the variations in their cash flow, and sadly they've not been able to benefit directly from the government's extremely generous support schemes for salaried workers and the self-employed. So I wonder if my right honourable friend would consider having a debate on the value that small company directors bring to our economy, their spirit of entrepreneurship, their willingness to take risks, and the employment opportunities that they bring to others.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for raising this crucial matter of the value small company directors bring to our economy, or the directors of small companies. They themselves are not necessarily small. Many excellent small businesses exist in his constituency, and I'm sure they will be grateful to him for bringing our attention to them today, and indeed in yesterday's general debate on the economy following the Chancellor's announcement. It is absolutely fundamental that small businesses are supported, which is why so much has been done. The lifeblood of the economy flows from small businesses. They are the ones who generate our wealth, who allow us to pay for the public services that we need. So it is crucially important that the self-employed are helped, as they are being by the Chancellor's comprehensive plans.
Sent to the North East and connect with the Chair of the Backbench Committee, Ian Mearns.
Very grateful, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, given we have another scheduled general debate in government time next Thursday, can I again appeal to the Leader of the House for time for Backbench Business Committee debates? I know that these are exceptional circumstances, but we've only had 1 day and 90 minutes since the general election. Mr. Speaker, this week there are 2 days of estimates debates, but those days, while the subjects are determined by the committee, that is work that we do on behalf of the liaison committee, whose time it really is. The first day of estimates debates on Tuesday was not afforded any measure of protected time, resulting in 3 80-minute debates with severely restricted speaking time and some members missing out. And we are also getting requests for time from select committee chairs to make report launch statements that we cannot facilitate. We know we don't have time next week, so if the Leader of the House, in the course of today's exchanges, refers members to the Backbench Business Committee, given that we have over 20 debates waiting to be heard, may I suggest that that is a suggestion that will lack a measure of legitimacy. So can I suggest to members of the House that if the Leader of the House does refer them to the Backbench Business Committee, that they look at him wistfully and possibly disapprovingly, while also shaking their finger because it will be a response, given the record, that currently lacks validity.
Mr. Speaker, the Backbench Business Committee does very important work in ensuring that issues that backbenchers are concerned about are brought to the wider attention of the British people. Now, there have been a number of backbench business debates facilitated by the government with general debates before the Backbench Business Committee was established, and we did our best to ensure that the general debates early in this session were ones that were of interest to the Backbench Business Committee. But the honourable gentleman quite rightly points out the pressures that there are on parliamentary time. Members want urgent questions answered, members want statements delivered, and that inevitably pressurises the timetable. We have also given time to the Petitions Committee, because without Westminster Hall they don't have their general slot. So I think the overall record of delivering time for backbench debates to take place has been generous, even if it hasn't specifically benefited his committee.
Rob Roberts.
Mr. Speaker, in the light of the 1,400 redundancies announced at Airbus in Broughton this week, which will seriously impact my Delhi constituency, can my right honourable friend find some time for my fellow North Wales Blue Wall MPs and I to have a debate on government support for the aviation and aerospace sector to see what more could be done over and above the £6 billion of sectoral support that's been provided to date?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. £6 billion is an important amount of support, and my honourable friend is right, I think, to highlight the work being done by the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy and HM Treasury over the past week to support local jobs in his constituency. Aviation and aerospace companies are vital to the economy, which is why the support has already been there, including time to pay, support for employees and loans. These are designed to ensure that companies of any size receive the help they need to get through this difficult time, airports, airlines and the wider supply chain. We will continue to work closely with the companies affected, and we are open to offering further support so long as all other government schemes and commercial options have been exhausted, including raising capital from existing investors. We will consult on what we can do on aviation taxes. The Chancellor will say more on that in due course.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I welcome the answer the Leader has just given, because aviation, aerospace and indeed our local airports are all struggling and do need help, and I hope that there will be time for a full and proper debate. But was the business leader of the House as shocked as I was by the Northern Ireland Health Minister, who proposed to close air links between Great Britain and Northern Ireland as part of his public health strategy? Does the business leader agree with me that that's completely and totally unacceptable, and will he ensure and commit from the dispatch box that links with Northern Ireland will remain open as a priority?
Mr. Speaker, I am as astonished as the honourable gentleman, even more astonished when I discovered that the comment was made by a unionist. It sounded more like Nicola Sturgeon's famous wall that she metaphorically wishes to build, and I'm sorry that a unionist would ever take this view. We are one united kingdom and we must maintain all our links.
Scotland.
Mr. Speaker, the business community in Padstow have highlighted an anomaly with me today around street trading. We currently have henna tattooists and braiders working from the quay, whilst our beauty salons and our tattoo parlours are closed. Will the Leader of the House bring forward some time so we can discuss this loophole and see how we can help legitimate businesses in Padstow that are paying business rates rather than those that pay no rates and are currently using the system?
Mr. Speaker, we will inevitably discuss these issues, and my honourable friend is championing his constituency interests in the way he always does, and in a noble way, for which he deserves great credit. Obviously, businesses are opening up at a different pace, and it's a question about spreading the risk to ensure that more and more businesses can open safely. But certainly Her Majesty's Government is keen that all businesses should be able to open safely.
Richard Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wonder, would the Leader share my disappointment that 24 hours on nearly from yesterday's summer economic update, the Scottish Government has yet to have the full extent of the Barnett consequentials of that announcement confirmed. It's not an uncommon situation for the Scottish Government to have to wait several days, in fact, for that detail to feed through, which makes the UK Government look rather incompetent and discourteous. Now, as somebody who clearly takes great care to be neither of those things, I wonder if the leader would be good enough to arrange for the relevant minister to come to the House to make a statement on behalf of the Treasury to explain why these problems appear to be a built-in feature of the Treasury's approach to such matter, rather than just an occasional glitch in the system.
Mr. Speaker, I'm glad to say that the Barnett consequentials so far are £4.6 billion. So there is a substantial amount of money, thanks to the strength of the United Kingdom, that is going to the Scottish Government. The Barnett consequentials relate to a well-established formula. The former Chief Secretary of the Treasury, Joel Barnett, a very distinguished Labour figure who established the formula, I think, in the Prime Ministership of Harold Wilson, either Harold Wilson or Jim Callaghan, and it has been a way in which money has been distributed ever since, and that money flows, and I think that is the important thing.
David Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last month at Great Western Park and in the Lady Grove area of my constituency, we had unauthorised traveller encampments descend, and local residents were subjected to noise, mess, vandalism and other antisocial behaviour for close to a week. Can my right honourable friend confirm the government is developing proposals to actively tackle this so our constituents don't have to deal with it for so long, and that they'll be brought to this House as soon as possible?
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for his question and commend him for the work he is doing in championing the concerns of the people of Wantage, the birthplace, of course, of Alfred the Great. Although the majority of travellers obey the law, we recognise that unauthorised encampments can cause significant distress to local residents with antisocial and criminal behaviour. The government consulted on measures to enable the police to tackle unauthorised encampments more effectively and will publish a response to the consultation in due course. As the then Housing Minister, now the Foreign Secretary, said when launching the consultation, we must promote a tolerant society in which legal sites are available for travellers, but equally the rule of law must be applied to all.
Sent to South Wales and visit Jessica Morden. Jessica Morden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Please can we have a debate on what the government can do to support our steel industry? Today, Community Union and others are launching a campaign to highlight how we need our steel, and a debate would give honourable members an opportunity to press ministers to commit to use Britain's steel as we rebuild and to get all departments signed up to the Steel Charter.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady is a great champion of the steel industry and has been for a long time, and the government is very keen to help all industry, and that's why the plans that have been put into place are in place to help the whole of the British economy, and that seems to be working well. It seems to be helping keep people in work, which is absolutely essential. As regards the specific of a debate, quite often before the end of a session, there is an adjournment debate that allows a wide range of topics to be debated. Now, I wouldn't like to give away what I'm going to say next week, but it may be possible that such a debate will be facilitated.
David Ellis.
Will my right honourable friend find time for a debate on the live exports of animals? I was horrified to learn that yet again we're going to have more consultation on the subject. All members are being inundated with emails about the import and export of real fur. Exporting live animals for export is cruel. It needs to stop. We don't need any more consultation.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend makes his case, as always, with passion and energy. It is one of the advantages of one of the many advantages, one of the manifold advantages of leaving the European Union, is that we will be able to make these types of laws for ourselves, and we won't have to give way to a higher power. And his energetic championing of these issues in Parliament will have its consequences.
No more, please.
James Murray.
We'll now go to James Murray in Ealing North. James Murray.
Mr. Speaker, on the 12th of May, I told the Chancellor about Ranjith Chandrapala, a bus driver from Hanwell in my constituency who died of COVID-19. I asked the Chancellor to extend the government's COVID-19 life assurance scheme for health and care workers' families to others, including the families of bus drivers like Ranjith. The Chancellor did not answer directly, and his team said I should ask the Transport Secretary. I've now received a response from the Minister for Buses saying that support provided to key workers on the front line will continue to be reviewed across government. Will the Leader of the House invite the Transport Secretary to make a statement before recess explaining once and for all whether and when the government will do the right thing and extend their life assurance scheme to the families of transport workers like Ranjith who have died during the outbreak?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman raises a sad and important case and an issue that should concern us all. I will happily undertake what he has asked me to do and raise this issue with the Secretary of State for Transport to try and ensure that he gets a complete answer.
Let us go and see Dame Cheryl Gillen. Dame Cheryl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm privileged to be the Honorary President of the Buckinghamshire CPRE. And the CPRE's latest report, which is called Greener, Better and Faster, makes great reading. And it sets out how the countryside itself can provide many of the solutions to tackling climate breakdown. Can the leader encourage his colleagues to hold a debate on this report in government time, to give us the opportunity to highlight further the ways in which we can support the transformational change needed across society to reach net zero emissions, and at the same time preserving our landscapes and our habitats and the wildlife living within them? I understand ministers have responded positively to the recommendations, and this would enable them to put on the record their support for the CPRE's sterling work, which benefits us all, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I am grateful to my right honourable friend for her question. I haven't yet read the report that she refers to, but I hope my right honourable friend will agree that this government certainly does want to ensure that our economic recovery is sustainable and environmentally friendly, and many of the measures announced by the Chancellor yesterday will ensure that this is the case. We are already championing innovative and eco-friendly technologies, and our ambitious environment, fisheries and agriculture bills will enable us to protect our precious natural environment and diverse ecosystems for years to come, in line with the legal commitment for a net zero economy by 2050. Along with her, I and many others representing rural constituencies want to see the country's rural economy coming firmly back to life in the next few months. Our countryside is far more than an attraction to preserve in aspic. It is made by the millions of people who live and work there, and I believe the government must do all it can to support rural lives and livelihoods throughout this recovery.
Liz Twist.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. People living with PKU or phenylketonuria, which is a genetic condition which means that people can't process proteins well. People with PKU have been waiting for a drug called Kuvan for many years. It's been available 11 years, and it's long overdue that they were able to access this therapy. So can the leader schedule a debate in government time to look at how we can ensure that these people are able to access Kuvan for the benefit of their life and their health?
Mr. Speaker, when each and every one of us as constituency MPs has a case where there is a drug available and there is a constituent who cannot get access to that drug, it is one of the issues we always pursue with the most single-minded vigour, and I think that is absolutely the right thing to do. I have had representations made to me by my own constituents about PKU, and therefore I have great sympathy with what she says. I would encourage her to continue making this case, and the hint I gave about the adjournment debate may also be useful for the Honourable Lady.
We now head up to Bolton to Mark Logan. Mark Logan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And laughing gas, or nitrous oxide as it's also known, is becoming the cigarette butts of our time. I'm sure members across the House today, similar to Bolton, are seeing an increasing number of those toxic silver canisters piling up across their neighbourhoods. It's a scourge on our society, and no parent wants to see their child exposed to that sea of silver. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that we are in need of a new debate as how to put an end to what is no laughing matter?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is getting into the bad pun territory, which I thought was the preserve of the Leader of the House, but I understand the seriousness of this issue, and I sympathise with the point that he is making. It is very unpleasant to see this type of litter, and he's right to understand the concerns parents have. It is an offence to supply nitrous oxide if the vendor knows or is insufficiently aware of the fact that it will be used for psychoactive effect. Concerns about the supply of nitrous oxide for its psychoactive effect can be reported to the police, and problems caused by the consumption of intoxicating substances in public places can and should be reported to the local authority. I am pleased to say that my honourable friend will have the opportunity to put his views directly to ministers during the adjournment debate on Tuesday the 21st of July on tackling the misuse of nitrous oxide.
Returning to Wales, to Geraint Davies. Geraint Davies.
Mr. Speaker, today the leader will receive a letter from me and other MPs setting out why it was illegal to actually pass a rule that said 250 MPs should be excluded from parliamentary debate, that Parliament is in fact not empowered to remove the source of its own legitimacy, and the vote itself was illegal because it excluded those 250 MPs. Will he undertake to ensure that he responds to this letter within 7 days with a view to resuming a hybrid operations in this Parliament, or else at least to set out in full the counter arguments to these arguments and make arrangements for a full debate on this matter, which includes all those people who've been excluded without a personal risk, in order that we can all get back to full operational work in this place, using the technology available, and do not have to resort to the courts.
To the House.
Mr. Speaker, I haven't yet received his letter, though I look forward to doing so with bated breath. The excitement that awaits me at the end of this session is almost overwhelming. However, Mr. Speaker, this House made its decision. It made its decision in a legitimate vote. We have exclusive cognizance of our affairs. We made the right decision. We're back to work. We are legislating effectively. The government is being held to account. It was absolutely the right thing to do, and the honourable gentleman, when he feels that he is well enough to come back, will be enormously welcome.
I don't think that's quite acceptable from the member, and I hope he'll be sending an apology to the Leader of the House. Let's go to Jack Merritt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Local bus services have been particularly hard hit by coronavirus, but this decline is nothing new. We see a third fewer bus journeys in Stoke-on-Trent than a decade ago. So would my right honourable friend agree to a debate in government time to consider how we might reverse this trend and aid our recovery?
Yes, I thank my honourable friend for raising a matter that is of great importance to all our constituents, and I'm sure that his constituents in Stoke-on-Trent would agree. Buses are a lifeline for people who need to travel for work or to buy food, and for all the other purposes where public transport is needed. And the government has committed over £650 million to keep buses running and increase services for those who need them, while also allowing for social distancing whilst travelling. We have announced a £5 billion package to improve local bus services, as well as a new national bus strategy, which will include Britain's first ever all-electric bus town and new low-fare, high-frequency superbus networks. Bus services received £2.1 billion last year, and since 2010, annual support from the public sector has been 16% higher in real terms than it was under the last Labour government.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Again, the Prime Minister's Special Advisor is in the news. As well as regularly sharing his many views on our nation's defence in his very public blog, he is now going to be visiting sensitive MOD sites in the middle of a defence review. Can the Leader of the House find some parliamentary time so the Minister for the Cabinet Office can share with us what changes they've been made to the Special Code of Conduct for Special Advisors?
Mr. Speaker, it is quite right that those Mr. Deputy Speaker, it is quite right that those who advise the Prime Minister are able to get access to information acting on the Prime Minister's behalf. It is entirely proper and a normal thing to happen.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tomorrow I shall be visiting a beauty salon in Cleethorpes. Now, I hasten to add this will not be for treatment, although I'm sure honourable members would say I'm probably in need of it. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in answer to an earlier question, my right honourable friend said businesses must open safely. I think, though, that beauty salons deserve an explanation as to what is needed in order to open safely. They are frustrated and angry, and can the leader arrange for a statement on Monday to explain the situation?
Mr. Speaker, I cannot understand why the Adonis of Cleethorpes can possibly need to be visiting a beauty salon himself, and indeed the people of Cleethorpes are renowned for their beauty across the nation. But the beauty sector is Well, of course, except Somerset. The beauty sector is, of course, an important one, and it does hold a key to our community's economic recovery. And I understand the anxiety of those who own or work in such establishments and commend their keenness to return to work. My honourable friend will be aware that non-essential retail can open provided that they have been made COVID secure. Pubs, restaurants, hairdressers, as well as museums and places of worship are now able to reopen provided they are COVID secure. Our hope is to reopen gyms and leisure facilities in mid-July. Other close contact services, tattoo and nail parlours, will follow as soon as possible. The government has been clear that it wants to reopen the economy carefully and gradually, and this is why some businesses which involve less sustained contact between people have opened before others.
Well, I shall be heading to the gym next week by the sounds of it, rather than the beauty salon. Via video link, Martin Day.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. As of December, the amount for child maintenance service arrears in my constituency was 599,000, a staggering amount being denied to hard-pressed families, and a situation now exacerbated further by shortfalls in payments due to paying parents' loss of income during the COVID-19 emergency. Can we therefore have a debate in government time on the operation of the child maintenance service and how this vital family income can be protected?
Mr Speaker, it's obviously important that child maintenance is paid and that families have access to the funds that they need. I would say that the Universal Credit has been working extremely well in helping families, and that the fact of increased advances up to 100% of a monthly payment and cutting the taper rate so that people keep more of their money is helping families in need. But the point he makes about maintenance payments is an important one.
Andrew Jones.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Please can we have a debate on build standards for homes? Across our country, many more homes are being built, but can more be done to improve the standards to which they're built, particularly on the environment and digital connectivity? And as more homes are built, there are examples where some new homes have been finished very poorly. Constituents have contacted me to highlight disturbing levels of quality problems and poor levels of customer service from some house builders in putting things right. If we have a debate, we will be able to address both issues.
Name those builders. Mr Speaker, I'm very sympathetic to what my honourable friend says. I think all of us as constituency MPs have had constituents come to us who have bought new homes that have not been up to standard. I have one constituent whose home was actually unsafe in the way that it was delivered to him. But it is important that we build more homes. We need to be Macmillan-esque in our ambition, but they need to be good quality homes, and they need to be safe and comfortable, energy efficient, but also beautiful, in the hope that they will survive through the generations in the way that some of the houses that we have in this country have survived. Those living in new built homes must feel confident that their property is safe and high quality, and we will ensure a new Houses Ombudsman is established and legislate to require developers to belong to it. This will offer better protection for home buyers, resolve disputes and improve quality. The government has taken bold steps to reopen the housing market safely in recent weeks following the crisis, and we're taking a number of legislative measures to make construction easier and quicker, and to bring forward transactions by suspending stamp duty for house sales under £500,000 until next March.
Via video link, Andrew Gwynn.
Thank you, and I too welcome many of the measures announced yesterday, and particularly the further support for the hospitality sector. The leaders just said that the government's intention is for gyms to reopen mid-July if those leisure facilities are deemed to be COVID-19 safe. Indeed, on this, the Prime Minister has said last week that a statement on their future was imminent. So can we have an indication from the leader as to when this statement will happen, so our gyms, pools and leisure centres, and for that matter, remaining retail businesses like beauticians, as we've just heard, can begin to plan for that new normal?
Mr Speaker, first of all, I thank the honourable gentleman for his warm welcome for what is being done for the hospitality sector. I'm grateful for this level of cross-party support. Imminent is imminent. I cannot do more than reiterate the Prime Minister's words, though perhaps we should consult Dr Johnson, I believe not an ancestor, and consult his great dictionary to see what imminent means.
Joy Morrissey.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Education is meant to be something where we have science, technology, history, philosophy coming together where diversity of thought is debated and explored, where children are taught how to think, not what to think. Sadly, this seems less often the case, and I had several students who came to me actually yesterday and said, we no longer feel that we are allowed to share our opinions if it's contrary to that of this sort of pervasive worldview within their school and integrated curriculum. Could we therefore have a debate in government time on the importance of protecting free speech and diversity of opinion within education? Like the BBC remit, why shouldn't schools be required to present multiple sides of political, historical, and philosophical debate?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. Freedom of speech is fundamental to how our society operates. Democracy, the rule of law, freedom of speech and the rights of property are the four pillars on which our constitution is built, and a constitution that has thrived through the centuries. If you take away freedom of speech, then you undermine all the other pillars that have supported our constitution. It is a requirement in state-funded schools to teach a broad and balanced curriculum that promotes the spiritual, moral, cultural, mental and physical development of pupils at schools. And this must be done in a way that encourages freedom of speech. And the key to that is that we all have to accept the right of people to express views that not only that we don't like, but on occasions we even find offensive. If we only accept views that we like and find unchallenging, then there is no freedom of speech.
Right, there's 16 members still trying to catch my eye. I would like to get you all in, but please, succinct questions and answers, please. Jeff Smith.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Earlier this week, I chaired a meeting of the All-Party Group on Mental Health, and we heard about a worrying rise in urgent mental health referrals, but a similarly worrying reduction in routine referrals, flagging up a probable pent-up demand on mental health services. So can we have a debate on how the NHS can be helped to deal with the mental health consequences of the pandemic?
Mr Deputy Speaker, this is a matter of concern to everybody across the House and has become a major priority. So mental health funding has increased. And there will be a further, by £12.5 billion in 2018-19, but this will go up by £2.3 billion a year by 2023-24 to support an extra 380,000 adults and 345,000 children. And there's been additional £9.2 million of additional funding to mental health charities during this crisis. So it is an issue the government takes really seriously, as do members across the House.
Richard Holden.
Mr Deputy Speaker, can I just say how delighted I am that the second reading of the Non-Domestic Ratings Public Lavatories Bill is coming forwards. As the co-chair of the Local Democracy APPG, huge amounts of our town and parish councils across the country have been having to pay huge amounts of money over the last few years to try and keep these public toilets open, and many have faced huge financial pressures and forced them to close. This measure coming forwards now is going to be an absolute lifeline to many of them, especially with the extra COVID costs they've been facing. And does my right honourable friend agree with me that alongside many of the other recent measures we've put in forwards to help local councils, this will be a major additional boost, ensuring that public toilets remain available, aren't closed, and will help our high streets and those with hidden disabilities in the future?
Mr Speaker, the taxation of toilets has been an issue since the reign of the Emperor Vespasian, when he famously said pecuniam non olet, money does not stink, and he thought it was quite reasonable to tax lavatorial facilities. Her Majesty's government takes the opposite view and is keen to remove these taxes, and I hope it will be a relief to one and all.
Video link. Debbie Abrahams.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Mr Deputy Speaker, on the 26th of June, the Telegraph's news site announced that half of the UK's imported COVID-19 infections are from Pakistan. This had no basis in fact and no reference to expert evidence, but it was followed by The Sun, the Mail Online, and soon afterwards, far-right groups stoking up anti-Muslim propaganda. This was nothing short of hate speech, and I know that just by raising this, I will be targeted by those on the right. So will the Leader of the House condemn the Telegraph and other media outlets for this irresponsible, offensive and racist reporting? Will he report this incident to the Independent Press Standards Organisation, as I have done? And will he contact all media owners, including those in social media, to demand a stop to this hate propaganda?
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady is right to report things that she thinks are inaccurate to ipso. That is the purpose of the body. The press is self-regulated, and that is quite right. The government should not intervene in the regulation of the press, because if it seeks to do that, it risks undermining freedom of speech. But equally, those protections are there, ipso is there, and the Honourable Lady is right to use it.
Video link, Henry Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. In recent decades, unfortunately, the environmentally important Sussex Coast kelp forest has been seriously degraded. Can we have a statement from the Secretary of State for the Environment on the proposed signing of a bylaw to ensure that this kelp forest is protected for the future?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend always raises important points in this House. This, I understand, has been passed through the normal processes, and a formal application is awaited by the relevant ministry, but I will try and find him more information on the details of the subject.
Stephen Doughty.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, it was good to hear from the leader of a motion on terrorism on Wednesday. I hope that's very much to ban one of the extreme right-wing organisations that a number of us have been campaigning on, such as the Order of Nine Angles, that should not be operating in this country. But I've heard that there are significant delays proposed to the online harms bill, which comes on the back of the online harms white paper. Could you explain what the government's plans are to bring that forward? Because as we heard in a group meeting with the All-Party Group on Anti-Semitism this week, many of these extreme right-wing organisations that have anti-Semitic, racist, Islamophobic, homophobic ideology are organising and recruiting and grooming new followers online.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. There is a full legislative programme, as the honourable gentleman knows, and bills are being brought forward and processed rapidly by this House. We are doing well at achieving our constitutional obligations. I would say in relation to the online harms bill, the absence of the bill does not remove the responsibility from the providers of these services to ensure that their services are run and provided properly, and that anti-Semitic material has no place on any properly run website.
Video link, Stephen Metcalfe.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Nail bars, beauty therapists, masseurs and tattoo artists, along with similar businesses, are important parts of our high streets, while dance studios, gyms, small outdoor festivals and swimming pools are an important part of our cultural life. All of whom are very keen to get back to work and reopen, have gone to extraordinary lengths to make themselves COVID safe, and yet they have not yet opened. Can I echo the call for a statement urgently on the specific reasons why certain sectors can't open, what the barriers to opening are, and how those barriers could be addressed?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, indeed, what is being done is ensuring that things open up in a progressed way so that the lowest risked activities open first and the higher risk ones open later, to ensure that it is safe to do so. And that is a programme that has been followed very safely and seems to be working. But I did say earlier that some further openings will happen in mid-July, and that's now not very far off. So there is good news coming, but the honourable gentleman, my honourable friend, is absolutely right to be championing these businesses. They want to get back to business. The government wants them to be able to get back to business, but it has to be safe.
Video link, Angus Brendan McNeill.
Yes, come on, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and it's good to see you indeed. Now, UK productivity is at the best of times 15.1% lower than the G7 average. And when methods of improving productivity are found, it is always foolish to go backwards. And Parliament should surely set an example to business and to workers. So instead of me taking 2 flights to London to a chamber, which, as we can see behind the Leader of the House, has pandemic restrictions, we should therefore continue with a safer, inclusive, more productive hybrid Parliament, where votes can happen on an island Hebridean croft with exemplar efficiency compared to the overseas Westminster conga lines.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman, the member for Nihillingham and Yar, makes his own argument for bringing Parliament back. May I say how much we miss him? Normally, we have some... entertainment. We have some forthright debate. We have the people of Nehilling and Anyar beautifully and brilliantly represented, whether the subject has anything to do with the honourable gentleman or not. There is always a catcall, a few words of wisdom coming forth. And now what do we have? We have some silent mutterings. He's on mute. And we miss his dulcet tones. We want him back, and he is the great argument for Parliament coming back physically.
Scott Benton.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Professional football clubs such as Blackpool FC are at the heart of their local communities, but many of them, especially those in Leagues 1 and 2, are suffering considerable financial difficulties at present due to the lack of matchday revenue, and with no imminent prospect of gates returning anytime soon, the fear is that over summer we will see successive Football League clubs enter administration because of COVID-19. Does my right honourable friend feel that it would be in order to have a debate in this place regarding sustainable finances for Football League clubs and the steps the government can take to support them?
Mr Speaker, it's a very good point raised by my honourable friend. Football clubs play a key role in the health and joy of communities throughout the country, especially in many of the northern towns and cities, like those in his constituency. These clubs are not just sporting institutions, but vital for many local economies and livelihoods, and I appreciate that the return of broadcast competitive sport behind closed doors doesn't really touch the joy and excitement of a full stadium of fans, whether it is football, cricket or rugby, which, well, cricket is slightly more commonplace in my constituency. DCMS questions were early this morning, and I would advise my honourable friend to take it up further with that department.
Justin Matters.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Further to the question from the Honourable Member for Delin on job losses at Airbus, I was pleased to hear the suggestion from the leader that help might now actually be available to prevent those job losses. I was also surprised because when I asked the Chancellor yesterday, he was very clear that no more support was forthcoming. So whilst this U-turn is welcome, I think it would be important that we get the Chancellor back actually to give another statement to confirm whether there will now in fact be an aviation sector deal to prevent us losing these highly skilled jobs that we cannot afford to let go.
Mr Speaker, I'll reiterate what I've said because this has been government policy for some time. We will continue to work closely with the companies affected, and we are open to offering further support so long as all other government schemes and commercial options have been exhausted, including raising capital from existing investors. And I think it was on the news this morning that a major company is at least keeping that option open. It is not all for the government to do. Existing investors have a responsibility as well. But the position is, so long as all other government schemes and commercial options have been exhausted, then the government is open to offering further support. But that's been the position for some months.
Sean Bailey.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Crime and antisocial behaviour continue to blight my communities in Wednesbury, Albury and Tipton, and I've been inundated by residents from Tividale who have had to organise themselves into a street watch in order to combat crime and antisocial behaviour. Can I ask my right honourable friend, Mr Speaker kindly granted me an adjournment debate earlier this year. I've raised this issue with our right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, and I've raised this issue with our honourable friend, the Member for Louth and Horncastle, the Minister of State, who came to my constituency and met with my constituents. What advice would he give me and my constituents in Tividale to ensure that this issue is not brushed under the carpet and they finally, after 20 years of broken promises, get their voices heard?
Yeah.
Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend doesn't need any advice from me because he clearly knows how to use the parliamentary procedures to ensure that an important issue affecting his constituency is raised, and it is our duty as MPs to try and help our communities be safe and secure, and that the law-abiding members of it feel confidence as they go about their business. The government is doing the right things. We've already taken on an extra 3,000 new police officers, part of the aim to employ another 20,000 in total, but I commend my honourable friend for what he's been doing so far and would encourage him to carry on badgering us all until he is satisfied.
Video link, Tulip Siddiq.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The MOD owes Iran more than £400 million and has said it wants to pay this debt. And yet the government has been fighting paying it in international courts for more than 20 years. In 2017, the Iranian ambassador put on social media that the money was about to be sent. Could we please have a debate in government time to discuss what the delay is in settling our debt to Iran.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, Iran is not necessarily the most friendly regime to the United Kingdom, and I think we have to look at our relationship with Iran in the round, but I will happily take up her point with the Foreign Office.
Video link, Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Across the world, it's estimated, according to reports, that more than 40 million people are victims of modern slavery. And in the UK, we have first-rate legislation to combat modern slavery. But recently, we've heard the stories of what has occurred in Leicester, where victims of modern slavery are also becoming victims of COVID-19. So can we have a statement from the Home Secretary on what measures the government is now taking to combat modern slavery and to bring those evil people who continue to perpetrate this crime to justice, and so they can suffer for the crime that they're committing against humanity?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend is so right to raise this point. The evil of modern-day slavery should not be underestimated. And we were the first country to publish a government modern slavery statement, setting out the steps we have taken to identify and prevent modern slavery in our supply chains. And it's one of the great achievements of the former Prime Minister, my right honourable friend, the member for Maidstone. We have launched at the Home Office a new single competent authority to handle cases of modern slavery and a new digital system making it easier for those on the front line to refer victims for support. This has allowed us to identify more victims than ever before. Last year, over 10,000 potential victims were referred, 52% higher than 2018. And that is worrying in itself, that there should be such a high number. A high number is an indication that we are introducing policies that help, but can't be an indication of success, because that there is any modern-day slavery is in fact in and of itself not a success. There are more police operations going on, 1,600 currently, which is not far off tenfold the number only 4 years ago, but we've got to go further. Modern-day slavery is an evil, and my honourable friend is right to highlight it.
John Sparrow.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I realise that the Chancellor had a lot on his plate yesterday, but unfortunately there seem to be no announcements regarding the green potential of high